There is a specific kind of theory that lives inside the Steven Universe fandom. Not the casual ones. Not the kind someone posts at midnight and deletes in the morning. The kind that someone builds over weeks. The kind that references background art from episodes that aired years apart, cross-checks gem placements with mural architecture, pulls color palette data from screenshots, and runs it against the show's internal lighting logic. The kind that, when you read it for the first time, you feel something shift in your chest a little. Not because it is definitely true, but because it might be. And because the show is layered precisely the way a show would be if it were hiding something, if it were built by someone who trusted its audience to look closely and rewarded them when they did. Steven Universe ran on Cartoon Network from 2013 to 2019. It was created by Rebecca Sugar, the first solo female creator in Cartoon Network's history, and that fact matters because her presence is in every frame of it. The songs, the colors, the architecture of the stories, the way the emotional logic of the show and the cosmological logic of the show mirror each other so consistently that you sometimes cannot tell where one ends and the other begins. It is a show built by someone who cared deeply about what they were making, and that care is visible in the kind of detail that makes this specific theory culture possible. The premise, for anyone coming to this fresh, is this. A young, half-human, half-alien boy named Steven Universe lives in a beach town called Beach City. He is raised by three ancient alien beings called crystal gems, named Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl, who are simultaneously his guardians, his family, and the last remnants of a rebel faction that fought a war against their home civilization thousands of years ago. His mother, Rose Quartz, was the leader of those rebels. She gave up her physical form to bring Steven into the world, which means Steven was born with her gemstone in his stomach. He has all of her power and none of her memories, and the show, at its core, is about him trying to understand who she was, who he is, and what he is supposed to do with everything she left him. That is the surface of it. But the show becomes, over 5 seasons, a film, and a limited follow-up series called Steven Universe Future, one of the most philosophically and emotionally ambitious things that has ever aired in a children's animation time slot. It deals with grief and identity and the cost of secrets and what we owe the people we love and how institutions cause harm even when the individuals inside them mean well. And underneath all of that, it builds a mythology that is dense and internally consistent and full of deliberate detail that the show's audience spent years cataloging and cross-referencing and turning into exactly the kind of theory work that this video exists to examine. That is what tonight is about. Not the official lore, though we will be in it constantly. Not the confirmed reveals, though several will come up as foundation. Tonight is about the theories. The ones that are strange and beautiful and, in several cases, genuinely dark once you follow them to where they lead. Some of them are probably wrong, some of them are probably correct. A few of them are the kind where you are not entirely sure the writers knew the full answer themselves, and the theory simply inhabits the gap in a way that feels uncomfortably true. We have 10 of them tonight. They move from character-specific to civilization scale to metaphysical. We are going to spend time in each one. We are going to build them from the ground up rather than dropping the conclusions on you and walking away, because with Steven Universe, the building is half the point. The show teaches you how to watch it, and watching it correctly means letting things accumulate. So settle in, get comfortable. Wherever you are, this is the kind of thing that takes a while and does not rush. We are starting with the largest, strangest, most cosmologically loaded theory in the fandom, and then working our way through. Before we go further, drop a comment and tell me where you are and what time it is. I always love knowing where these videos find people. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is a good moment. Part 1. White Diamond fractured herself to become perfect, and the other diamonds are her missing pieces. Let's begin with what we actually know about White Diamond, because even the confirmed facts about this character are extraordinary and need to be properly established before the theory can do what it does. White Diamond is the supreme authority of the Great Diamond Authority, which is the governing body of the entire gem civilization. She is, by every measure the show provides, the most powerful gem in the known universe. Her primary power is the ability to project her consciousness into other gems and seize complete control of them. Not influence, not persuasion, complete takeover. The gem she inhabits becomes a vessel for White's will, their eyes going blank, their movements mechanical, their voice speaking words they are not choosing to speak. It is, functionally, the most violating power the show depicts, and White has used it on essentially everyone who has come close enough to be a problem. She did this to Pink Diamond's original Pearl, the Pearl who had served Pink from the early days, who matched her in color and whose gemstone sat on her navel, mirroring her diamond's placement. White Diamond took that Pearl away from Pink as punishment for Pink's unacceptable behavior on Earth, and she did something to that Pearl, something the show depicts only in glimpses and implications, that left Pink Pearl with a shattered eye and a psychological state so damaged that when we meet her in Steven Universe Future, she is still processing it thousands of years later. White did it to Yellow Diamond and Blue Diamond when they tried to stand up to her in the Season 5 finale. Two beings of genuinely enormous power, powerful enough to have been running a galactic empire for millennia, and she controlled them like puppets in a moment, almost casually, without apparent effort. She nearly did it to Steven. The show depicts this as one of the series' most frightening moments. Steven's body going rigid, his eyes going blank, White's consciousness pressing into him through the gem in his stomach, and finding something it cannot fully contain, something that pushes back. For most of the show's run, White Diamond is not really present. She is an absence. A name spoken with something between reverence and terror. She appears in murals, in rumors, in the way Yellow and Blue Diamond communicate about the structure of Homeworld's authority. When she finally appears, she is visually unlike every other character in the show, entirely monochromatic, drawn in a style that is slightly more realistic, slightly more detailed, slightly uncanny in comparison to the show's usual aesthetic. Her face is more expressive, more capable of subtlety, more human in a way that paradoxically makes her feel less like a person and more like something that has been performing personhood for so long. It has gotten very good at the performance. And she is the source of the question at the center of this theory. White Diamond is the foundation of gem civilization. The diamonds are the ruling authority. But what is the origin of the diamonds? The show never answers this. It gives us kindergartens, which are how ordinary gems are made. It gives us the Diamond Authority, which is the governing body. It never gives us the origin of the diamonds themselves. They are simply there, at the top, always having been there. The question of how they got there and where they came from is a question the show opens and does not close. The White Diamond fission theory begins with a piece of physics and a piece of color theory, and builds from there into something that once you see it is very difficult to unsee. White light, in physics, is not the absence of color. This is important. White light is the presence of all colors simultaneously. When white light passes through a prism, it separates into the full visible spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. White light contains everything. When it is broken apart, what you get is the individual colors that were always there, now externalized and visible separately. The show's color logic is meticulous. Gems are color-coded to their personalities, their powers, their social roles. Yellow Diamond is efficiency and conquest and the suppression of grief. Blue Diamond is sorrow and ritual, and the preservation of the past. Pink Diamond, as we eventually learn she truly was, is love and play and the refusal to conform to what she was expected to be. And White Diamond is presented explicitly as the source of all gem light. She says so herself in Change Your Mind. She sees herself as containing every color, every quality, every virtue the gem civilization might aspire to. She is the ideal toward which all other gems are imperfect approximations. What the theory proposes is that this is not just White Diamond's self-image. It is literally true in a way that White Diamond has spent a very long time trying not to examine. At some point in the prehistory of the gem civilization, White Diamond separated parts of herself out, not in the way kindergartens create gems, through a process of extraction from a planet. In a more personal, more fundamental way, she divided her own spectrum. She identified the parts of herself that she considered impurities, aspects of her nature that complicated her vision of absolute perfection, and she gave those parts physical form as separate beings. Blue Diamond received her sadness, her grief, her capacity for deep attachment, and the mourning that comes with it. Yellow Diamond received her anger, her drive, her appetite for conquest and order, and the satisfaction of things being made efficiently correct. Pink Diamond received her love, her playfulness, her capacity for joy and genuine connection, the part of her that could be delighted by organic life and moved by music and willing to abandon everything for a feeling. And what remained of White Diamond after those separations was what the show gives us, a being that has the appearance of containing everything, because she is made of white light and white light is all colors, but a being that actually contains nothing, because the things that gave those colors meaning, the actual emotional and experiential content of them, have been externalized. She is a prism that has separated its spectrum and is now presenting as white because there is nothing left to separate. The emptiness of White Diamond, the strange quality she has of being enormous and present and yet somehow absent, the way she interacts with other gems through performance of care rather than actual care, the way her gestures toward warmth always feel slightly off, like someone who has studied warmth rather than experienced it. All of this makes a specific and terrible sense under this theory. She did not become cold and controlling because of some external trauma. She made herself cold by discarding everything that would have prevented coldness. She optimized herself into a state that felt like perfection from the inside and looked like a husk from the outside. And here is where the theory's most powerful implication emerges. When White Diamond says in Change Your Mind, the line that launched 1,000 fan discussions, "She is a part of me, a part I always have to repress." She is speaking about Pink Diamond, and the standard reading of this line is psychological. White sees something of herself in Pink. She sees the impulsive, emotional, difficult qualities she has always tried to suppress in herself reflected back in Pink's behavior, and she finds it intolerable. But the theory's reading of this line is literal. Pink is not like a part of White. Pink is a part of White. The repression is not a metaphor for emotional suppression. It is the act that created Pink as a separate being. White repressed that part of herself so completely, so fundamentally, that it became something else. Pink Diamond is what White Diamond's love looks like when it is removed from White Diamond and given its own body and history and name. This is why White cannot understand Pink. A person cannot understand the part of themselves they have disowned. White has not just suppressed her capacity for love, she has externalized it into a separate being, and then spent the existence of that being alternately trying to control it and refusing to acknowledge what it represents. When Pink Diamond refuses to behave like a proper diamond, when she develops genuine relationships with the beings on Earth and finds meaning in their organic, impermanent lives, when she eventually becomes rose quartz and builds a rebellion and has a child and dissolves into that child and leaves nothing of herself behind except the love she was made to carry, White Diamond experiences all of this as a kind of visceral horror that she cannot fully account for. She cannot account for it because she cannot see it clearly. She is looking at the externalized piece of herself that she discarded and watching it do everything she could not allow herself to do. She is watching her own capacity for love live a life she decided she was not allowed to live. And the response to that is not understanding. The response is tightening control, demanding compliance, trying to reshape Pink into something that looks more like what White decided the perfect version of that particular diamond should be. This is the cycle of harm the show depicts. White damaged Pink. Pink, in turn, caused various kinds of harm to the people around her, to Spinal, to Pearl, to the crystal gems who fought and suffered and lost, to the world she inadvertently set up to be corrupted. And Steven, who carries Pink's gem, arrives at the end of the cycle carrying all of it and having to figure out something better to do with it. The inheritance of White Diamond's original fracture extends through generations. Now consider the healing scene at the end of the main series. Steven, acting as Pink's representative, combines with yellow, blue, and white, and together their combined power heals every corrupted gem. The show frames this as 4 diamond powers in harmony. But look at it through the fission theory lens. What happens when you put all 4 diamond lights back together? You get white light again, not White Diamond as a personality or a ruler, but white light as a condition. Everything in its proper relationship, the full spectrum present, the prism reversed. The healing light is what White Diamond looks like whole. It is the correction of the original fracture, and the reason it works, the reason it heals what 3 diamond powers in grief could only corrupt, is that it contains what was missing, Pink's light, love, the piece of the spectrum that makes the rest of it something other than damage. The corruption was caused by white, yellow, and blue acting without Pink. The healing requires all 4. This is not just narrative symmetry. Under the fission theory, It is the physics of what White Diamond did to herself. She broke herself into pieces, and anything done with only some of the pieces will always be incomplete, always wrong in some direction. The healing requires the reintegration, even if only temporary, even if only symbolic, of everything that was split apart. The visual evidence in the show is consistent enough to be systematic rather than coincidental. White Diamond is drawn in grayscale not because she is colorless, but because her colors have been separated out. The other diamonds each carry one portion of her spectrum: blue for the cool end, yellow for the warm middle, pink for the warmth and life. When you add them together, you approach white. When one is missing, you approach something broken. When Steven gets through to White Diamond in the finale and she cracks and blushes pink, what is happening is that the separated piece is, for a moment, finding its way back. Pink light returning to the source. And the source, the thing that was presenting as white because it had emptied itself, becomes visible as something that was always more than it appeared. The theory has one final dimension that is worth sitting with for a moment, and it concerns what White Diamond is doing by the time Steven Universe Future takes place. White is allowing gems to project their consciousness into her. She has reversed her power. Instead of invading other gems and controlling them, she is opening herself to be entered, offering herself as a space where other gems can access parts of themselves they cannot reach from inside their own limited experience. She is becoming a vessel for other people's healing. If you accept the fission theory, this is not just redemption arc character development. It is atonement in a very specific form. White Diamond, who once pulled herself apart to achieve what she thought was perfection, who externalized her own inner life and then spent millennia trying to control what she had created, is now offering herself back not as a ruler, but as a container. Not as someone who holds power over others, but as someone who holds space for others to find what they have lost. She cannot put herself back together. Pink is gone in any form that could be reintegrated, but she can become the thing that Pink was, a place where love and healing are available to the people who need them. That is a quietly extraordinary arc for a character the show barely got to. Buried inside a theory the show never confirmed, sitting in the visual language and the physics of color theory and one line from a Season 5 finale, is one of the most complete pictures of a character anywhere in the franchise. Part 2. Pearl was White Diamond's Pearl before she was anyone else's, and everything she has ever done makes more sense if you know that. This theory began, in the fandom's history, before the show had even given us a proper look at White Diamond's design. It was built on a single piece of evidence and a chain of logical reasoning that, when the show revealed more information, kept gaining support rather than losing it. And then the show confirmed half of it and left the most interesting half permanently unresolved. Here is the foundation you need to understand Pearl in the context of Gem Society. Pearls are personal attendants, created specifically to serve a high-status gem. Not soldiers, not workers, not technicians. Servants of a particular and intimate kind, made to stand beside one specific gem and assist them and, in the most direct sense, to belong to them. The show is unambiguous about this. Yellow Pearl serves Yellow Diamond. Blue Pearl serves Blue Diamond. Their existence is defined by the relationship. Their personality, aesthetic, and gem placement are all calibrated to mirror the diamond they serve. This mirroring is not incidental. The show establishes it as a rule. Yellow Diamond has her gem on her chest. Yellow Pearl has her gem on her chest, in the same spot. Yellow Pearl's skin is yellow. Her hair is yellow gold. Her entire visual presentation is a reflection of Yellow Diamond's palette. Blue Diamond has her gem on her chest. Blue Pearl mirrors this exactly. Blue skin, blue shading, gem on the chest. The correlation is consistent and appears to be intentional, an in-world signal about Pearl-Diamond relationships. And then there is our Pearl. Our Pearl has a gem on her forehead. Her skin is white, not pink, not rose-colored, white. Her hair in early seasons is a pale orange pink, but her fundamental coloring, her skin tone, the underlying palette she is drawn in, is white, and her gem is on her forehead. White Diamond's gem is on her forehead. This is the bedrock of the theory, and it was present from essentially the beginning of the show before anyone knew what White Diamond looked like. Fans built the case from the logical extension of the pearl mirroring rule that the show established. If pearls mirror their diamonds, and if Pearl's gem is on her forehead and her skin is white, then Pearl was made for someone whose gem is also on their forehead and whose skin is also white. And when the show eventually revealed White Diamond's design, that is exactly where her gem is and exactly what her skin color is. The show's own explanation of this, which comes in fragmented pieces across the final 2 seasons, is this. Pink Diamond originally had a pearl who matched her, who had a pink and rose color scheme with a gem on her navel, mirroring Pink's placement. This is Pink Pearl, also called White Pearl in her damaged state, whom we meet briefly in Change Your Mind. White Diamond took Pink Pearl away from Pink as punishment for Pink's behavior. A new pearl was delivered to Pink, more sensible, custom-made, described in supplemental materials as a kind of replacement that would meet the standard Pink's previous pearl had failed to maintain. Our pearl is this replacement. The show confirms she belonged to Pink Diamond. The show has Pearl's compelled silence, her 1,000-year inability to speak about Pink Diamond's true identity, as the direct evidence of the Pink Diamond order she is operating under. The question the show does not answer is where our Pearl was before she was sent to Pink Diamond. Where was she made? Whom did she serve? The theory's answer is White Diamond. And the evidence for it is not just the gem placement, though the gem placement is significant. It is behavioral. It is the shape of who Pearl is. Peridot, upon first meeting Pearl, makes a point of noting that she looks like a fancy pearl. Not just a pearl, but a fancy one. In the gem hierarchy, this is a meaningful distinction. A regular pearl serves a regular gem of high status. A fancy pearl, the implication goes, serves someone at the very top, someone like White Diamond. The quality of a pearl's construction reflects the status of the gem they were made for. If Pearl looks exceptional by gem standards, the most natural explanation is that she was made for an exceptional purpose. There is also the matter of Pearl's knowledge. In Space Race, Pearl mentions having memories of other worlds. She knows the layout of the moon base in considerable detail. She is familiar with the human zoo on what turns out to be one of Homeworld's moons, familiar enough that her reactions upon visiting it in later episodes carry a specific quality of recognition. She has knowledge that goes beyond what you would expect from a Pearl who had served only in Pink Diamond's relatively low-status court during the colonization of a single planet. White Diamond, as the supreme ruler of the Gem Empire, would have traveled to every Diamond's court, would have attended every significant event in Gem civilization, would have been present at the inauguration of colonies and the commissioning of major projects. A Pearl who had served White Diamond would have been present at all of these things as well. She would have accumulated exactly the kind of broad institutional knowledge that Pearl demonstrates. She would know the moon base because she had been to the moon base with White Diamond. She would know the layout of the human zoo because she had accompanied White Diamond there at some point. She would have the kind of encyclopedic familiarity with Gem civilization that only someone who had served at the very top of it could have. Then there is the quality of Pearl's fear. The show depicts Pearl as someone who is afraid in ways that go deep, that predate Rose and the Crystal Gems and even the Rebellion. She is afraid in a way that has been shaped by something she does not speak directly about. There are moments where Pearl's anxiety spikes in situations that should not, based solely on what we know of her history as Pink Diamond's Pearl, produce that specific kind of fear. Moments in Homeworld contexts where something flashes across her that is older and more fundamental than the grief over Rose she carries. A Pearl who had served White Diamond, the most controlling and psychologically invasive being in the Gem civilization, would carry a very specific kind of fear. White Diamond inhabits other gems. She takes them over. She is the most extreme expression of the Gem hierarchy's fundamental structure. The idea that Pearls do not have inner lives worth protecting, that their consciousness is available to their owner in whatever way the owner requires. If Pearl served White Diamond, she served in an environment where that intrusion was not just possible, but was probably the constant background condition of her existence, where everything she was, every thought and feeling and preference she might have had, was available for inspection and override at any moment. That shapes a person, or a gem. It shapes them in ways that take thousands of years to work through, and Pearl, even by the end of Future, is still working through them. The psychological architecture of someone who spent significant time under that authority would be exactly what we see in Pearl. Someone who has learned to default to another's preferences, because her own preferences were never safe, Someone whose identity is built around devotion because devotion was the only acceptable form of selfhood available to her. Someone who finds Pearl's own opinions and desires both intensely important and intensely threatening because both acknowledging them and denying them have historically been dangerous. Now layer over this the specific nature of Pearl's relationship with Rose. Pearl meets Pink Diamond in her later stages, when Pink has already begun to develop the rebellion and the persona of Rose Quartz. And Rose, as Pink Diamond in disguise, is the opposite of everything Pearl has been trained to expect from her diamond. Rose asks Pearl how Pearl feels. Rose takes Pearl's perspective seriously. Rose treats Pearl, consistently and genuinely, as someone whose inner life matters. To someone who had spent time serving White Diamond, that would not just be unusual. It would be revolutionary. It would be the thing that makes devotion feel, for the first time, like a choice rather than a compulsion. Of course, Pearl falls in love with her. Not just romantically, though the show makes clear there are romantic feelings there. She falls into a kind of devotion that is different from any devotion she has experienced before because it is freely given rather than structurally mandated. And that freely given devotion, Pearl discovers across thousands of years, has its own complications and costs. But the quality of it, the felt difference between serving someone who sees you as furniture and serving someone who asks about your experience, that difference would be enormous for a Pearl, shaped by the context this theory proposes. The show confirmed Pearl belonged to Pink. It did not tell us who Pearl served before that. The gem placement evidence is still there. The behavioral evidence is still there. The psychological architecture of the character makes a consistent and coherent kind of sense under this reading. And it adds a layer to the show's exploration of power and control and what it does to people over time that the confirmed canon version of Pearl's history does not fully account for. What this theory ultimately proposes is that Pearl has never, at any point in her existence, been free from the structure that shaped her. She moved from White Diamond's court to Pink Diamond's court, to the crystal gems, to the aftermath of everything that followed. And in every context, she has been finding her way toward an identity that is genuinely her own, a self that is not defined by whom she serves. The show depicts this as the central ongoing arc of Pearl's character. Under this theory, the weight of what she is moving away from is even heavier than the confirmed version suggests. She is not just a gem who loved Rose and is grieving the loss of that love. She is a being who was made for the most controlling force in the universe, transferred to one of that force's most complicated and rebellious children, and who chose, when the child started a rebellion, to follow the rebellion rather than return to the source. She became a renegade Pearl not just because she chose to help Rose rather than report her to Homeworld, but because choosing anything, choosing for herself, was the most subversive act available to a Pearl shaped by White Diamond's court. Part 3. Rose Quartz was a strategic genius who planned everything, and then the show systematically demolished that theory. And both the theory and the demolition are important. This is the theory the show builds and then takes apart in front of you, and the dismantling is so deliberate and so thorough that it becomes a story of its own about how we construct the people we love after they are gone. In the first season of Steven Universe, Rose Quartz is built as a mythological figure. She appears in memories and recordings and the testimonies of the people who loved her. She is referred to with a reverence that edges on religious. Jasper, one of the show's most formidable antagonists, says explicitly that while she fought against Rose Quartz, she respected Rose Quartz's strategic mind. Other gems speak of Rose as a military genius, a transformative leader, a being who saw possibilities others could not see, and made choices that looked incomprehensible at the time and visionary in retrospect. The fan community did what the fan community does with this kind of setup. It started filling in the gaps. And the most elaborate and most widely held theory that emerged from that gap filling was the Rose had a plan theory. The theory goes like this. Rose Quartz understood something that no one around her fully grasped. The crystal gems could not win a conventional conflict with Homeworld. The power differential was too large. The numbers were too unbalanced. The crystal gems could fight indefinitely but could not achieve decisive victory because nothing they had could permanently neutralize a sufficiently powerful Homeworld gem. Poofing someone sends them to regenerate. Every enemy you defeat comes back? Rose knew this, and Rose, being a strategist rather than just a fighter, began working on a different kind of solution. Steven is that solution. Under this theory, Rose made Steven deliberately as a weapon, not a weapon in a crude sense, a wild card. A variable the gem civilization's entire logical structure was not designed to handle. Steven has gem powers but human biology. He ages, which means he develops, which means he changes in ways gem systems are not built to track or counter. He can fuse with humans, something that should be physically impossible and that homeworld technology has no protocol for. His healing tears revive organic life and can reverse corruption under the right circumstances. He can communicate with the cluster, a superweapon buried in the Earth's core that Homeworld considers an asset. He can dream project into minds across extraordinary distances. He is, from this theory's perspective, the most carefully designed possible answer to an impossible strategic problem. The theory even accounts for why Rose's recorded message to Steven is so vague and unspecific. She does not tell him what his purpose is. She does not give him a mission. She says she loves him and that she has given up being a person so he can be his own. According to the theory, the vagueness is intentional. Any specific instructions would have imposed Rose's strategic framework on him, which would have compromised the fundamental purpose of what she was creating. The whole point of Steven is that he is not constrained by the categories gem civilization operates in. Telling him to do something specific would have made him a soldier. Telling him nothing made him something new. It is a beautiful and internally consistent theory. It makes Rose into exactly the kind of figure the early show implies she might be. It gives her choices, meaning, and weight. It makes the cost of creating Steven, the dissolution of Rose's physical existence, feel like the ultimate strategic sacrifice, rather than a personal choice with complicated and somewhat chaotic motivations. And then the show starts taking it apart. Lion 4, alternate ending, is the most explicit dismantling. Steven finds a mysterious key. He is absolutely convinced it must be his destiny, the thing Rose left him that will explain what he is supposed to do, the key to the literal chest in Lion's dimension that surely contains his mission. He climbs into the dimension, walks to the chest, tries the key. The key is the wrong size. The lock does not turn, and a recording Steven finds instead, rather than a destiny or a mission, tells him that Rose had no specific plan for him. She did not know what he would be. She did not know what gender he would have. She and Greg had a name picked out in case he turned out to be a girl. She left him a life, not a plan. She wanted him to be his own person. Not because that was a strategic choice, but because that is what she genuinely wanted to give him. This is not a subtle revision. The show is explicitly, directly, point by point, undoing the strategic genius narrative. And it keeps going. What emerges from the show's full run is a picture of Rose as someone who was reactive rather than strategic. Someone who dealt with immediate problems and moved on without fully reckoning with what she had left behind. She faked her own death as Pink Diamond, believing that the Diamonds would leave Earth alone if they thought she was gone. This was catastrophically wrong. The Diamonds did not leave Earth alone. They launched the corrupting light. Thousands of gems were transformed into feral creatures. The war Rose thought she had ended by sacrificing her identity was not ended at all. It was simply replaced with a different and worse catastrophe. Not because the plan was complicated and unpredictable outcomes are inevitable. Because Rose did not think far enough ahead. She sealed Bismuth in a bubble and told the other crystal gems that Bismuth had gone missing in battle. Not because there was a strategic reason to do this. Because they had a disagreement about ethics, and Rose did not want to have the continued conversation. Bismuth had made a weapon that could shatter gems, including diamonds. Rose's position was that shattering was wrong regardless of circumstance. Bismuth pushed back. They fought. Rose won. And rather than deal with the aftermath, rather than have the difficult ongoing conversation about means and ends that the situation required, Rose made the problem disappear by making Bismuth disappear. This is not strategic genius. This is conflict avoidance with an enormous amount of power at its disposal. She abandoned Spinel. She compelled Pearl's silence through a direct diamond order without apparently thinking very carefully about what that would cost Pearl over centuries and millennia. She caught and bubbled corrupted gems over thousands of years without finding a way to help them, without apparently spending sustained energy on the question of whether and how they could be healed. The TV trope's description of Rose, with characteristic bluntness, summarizes it this way. She repeatedly displays an inability to plan beyond the short term that consistently comes back to bite her. The show is not being cruel about Rose. It is being honest. And the honesty is that Rose was not a chess player. She was not a strategist. She was someone who fought passionately for things she loved, who was genuinely willing to sacrifice for what she believed in, and who was simultaneously very good at finding ways to not look at the full cost of her choices. She solved immediate problems brilliantly and left the consequences to others. She made Steven out of love, not calculation. She gave up her physical form because she wanted to have a child, not because she was deploying a carefully designed wildcard into a long-range strategic game. Now here is where the theory and its dismantling together become something more interesting than either one alone. The Rose as planner theory was constructed by fans who were engaging with a very specific kind of storytelling. When someone we love is gone, and we cannot ask them what they meant, we tend to interpret their choices as meaningful. We look for the plan. We find patterns and we build stories about what those patterns were pointing toward, because a person with a plan is comprehensible in a way that a person who simply made a series of impulsive, loving, reactive, sometimes careless choices is not. This is not unique to Steven Universe fans theorizing about Rose. This is what people do with the people they lose. The Crystal Gems spent thousands of years building an image of Rose as someone who knew what she was doing. Pearl built her entire identity for much of the post-war period around the belief that every choice Rose made had purpose and meaning. Garnet deferred to Rose's memory as a kind of moral compass. Even the other Crystal Gems who knew Rose less directly carried an inherited image of her as fundamentally wise and intentional. Steven spends the first several seasons of the show looking for the plan, the hidden message, the thing his mother left that will explain his purpose. He is not just searching for information about Rose. He is searching for the version of Rose that makes the grief and the weight and the cost of everything she left behind feel like it was pointing somewhere, like it was building towards something, like it was a plan, rather than a series of choices made by a being who was also very confused and very imperfect and very much trying to figure out who she was. What the show gives him instead is permission. Permission to love her without requiring her to have been perfect. Permission to be angry at her without that anger negating the love. Permission to inherit her legacy and decide for himself what to do with it, rather than discovering a pre-existing mission that makes the decision for him. The theory about Rose as strategic genius was not just wrong. It was the error the show was specifically designed to help the audience move through. It was the first response, the reaching for a plan response, that the show wanted its audience to hold and then gently revise. Not by rejecting Rose, but by seeing her more clearly. Not as a chess player who knew every move in advance, but as someone who fought hard for things she believed in and left behind a complicated mess that her kid had to sort out, and that turned out, somehow, to be okay. The most uncomfortable version of what the theory's dismantling suggests about Rose is one the show approaches but does not quite say directly. The reason Rose made Steven was not strategic, but neither was it entirely uncomplicated. Rose had accumulated, over thousands of years of living on Earth as someone who was not and could never again be who she had originally been, a very heavy set of burdens. She was Pink Diamond pretending to be Rose Quartz. She carried the secret of the faked shattering. She carried bismuth in a bubble in Lion's dimension. She carried the accumulated weight of choices she could not undo. She carried Pearl's compelled silence. She carried the memory of Spinel in a garden she was not going back to. She carried all of it, and she had no mechanism for putting any of it down. A child who would be genuinely new, genuinely his own person, genuinely not a continuation of anything she had built or broken, was the one thing she could choose that was not already part of the weight she was carrying. Steven was not her plan. He was her hope. And hope, unlike a plan, does not guarantee anything specific. It just gives you a reason to keep going until something better comes from what you have started. Part 4. Lapis Lazuli is older than the Diamond Authority, and her power proves it. Every time someone in the show meets Lapis Lazuli, there is a moment of recognition that does not quite happen the way it should. And the theory built on this absence is one of the most carefully evidenced in the fandom. When Pearl hands Steven the mirror in Mirror Gem, she describes it as a tool for learning about gem culture and history, says she thinks it is broken because she cannot get it to work, and sends Steven off with it without telling him what gem is inside it. Pearl does not know what gem is inside it. The mirror was found at the Galaxy Warp and has been stored in Pearl's gem for an unspecified but clearly significant amount of time. Pearl has been unable to identify what type of gem it might contain. This is strange. Pearl has been alive for at least 5,000 years. She fought in the Gem War. She served in Homeworld's court structure. She has extensive knowledge of gem history and gem types and the visual signatures that identify them. The show repeatedly demonstrates Pearl's ability to identify gems, their types, their likely powers, their place in Homeworld's hierarchy, from relatively minimal information. When Lapis emerges from the mirror, Pearl initially reacts as though she is encountering something she does not recognize. Not, "I know this gem and it is dangerous." Not, "I know this type of gem and here is what they do." Something more fundamental. She does not know what kind of gem this is. Contrast this with Jasper's reaction when she first encounters Steven. Jasper identifies Steven's powers, his gem type, his connection to Rose Quartz, his relative power level compared to Rose, all of this in moments. She is doing gem pattern recognition, taking the available information and filing it correctly into her understanding of gem civilization. This is how gems who know their civilization work. Pearl is one of the most historically knowledgeable gems we meet, and she could not identify what kind of gem was in the mirror she had been carrying for what appears to be a very long time. Then there is Lapis's power. The show is, by the end of the series, fairly well calibrated in terms of power levels. We know roughly what gems can do at different scales. We know that Era 1 gems are more powerful than Era 2 gems because Homeworld's resource depletion has produced weaker gems in more recent years. We know that the most powerful individual gems outside of diamonds are things like Jasper, who is an exceptional quartz, or bismuth, whose construction powers are formidable. We know the scale of what the crystal gems can do collectively. Lapis Lazuli, with a cracked gem, fights the crystal gems, defeats them, and simultaneously constructs an elevator from the Earth's ocean floor to beyond the atmosphere using the entire world's ocean as her material. She does all of this while significantly power limited by her damaged gem. The show explicitly states that her cracked gem means she is not operating at full capacity. What does Lapis Lazuli at full capacity look like? Because cracked and limited, she moved a planet's ocean. Unconstrained, she is manipulating bodies of water on a planetary scale and possibly beyond. That is not Era 1 power. It is not even clearly in the same bracket as the most powerful Era 1 gems we see. It is something else entirely. The theory proposes that Lapis is not from the era of the Gem War. She predates it. She predates the current Diamond Authority. She is an ancient gem created in an earlier period of gem civilization when resources were more abundant, and the methods of gem creation produced beings of a fundamentally different power scale. Her capacity for hydrokinesis is not the result of exceptional gem quality in the Era 1 sense. It is the result of having been made in a context that no longer exists, under conditions that produce gems the current civilization cannot replicate or fully understand. This explains, in one step, why Pearl could not identify her gem type. Pearl knows Era 1, gems, and more recent gems, and, presumably, the historical record of gem types as maintained by the Diamond Authority. If Lapis was created before the Diamond Authority, before the current era's cataloging and classification system existed, then she would not be in that record. She would not match any type that Pearl's knowledge of gem civilization would include. She would be a gap in the historical record, because the historical record only extends as far back as the system that created it. The detail that Pearl could not activate the mirror is also relevant here. The mirror's function seems connected to Lapis's willingness to cooperate. When Lapis chooses not to respond, the mirror appears non-functional. When she chooses to respond to Steven, it works. This suggests a level of autonomous agency in the mirror that is unusual for what is supposed to be a simple artifact. If Lapis is ancient enough, if her connection to the mirror is not that of a gem imprisoned in a technological object, but of a gem whose consciousness has, over time, become deeply integrated with the specific artifact she has been contained in, then the mirror might be less like a prison and more like an extension of Lapis herself. A very old, very powerful gem who has been contained for so long that the distinction between the gem and the container has become complicated. The theory has another layer that connects to the history of the Galaxy Warp. The mirror was found at the Galaxy Warp, which is the facility on Earth that connected Earth to Homeworld through a network of warp pads. The crystal gems, at some point after the war, destroyed the galaxy warp to prevent further contact with Homeworld. This suggests the mirror was at the galaxy warp before the war ended, because afterwards the warp was destroyed and inaccessible. If the mirror was at the galaxy warp before the war, it was there during the war or before it. And Pearl, who was part of the crystal gems during the war and who handled the galaxy warp area, picked up the mirror at some point during or after the rebellion and has been carrying it in her gem ever since, without knowing what it contained, without being able to activate it, carrying it with her for thousands of years without understanding what she was carrying. That is a very long time to carry something you don't understand. The psychological reading of Lapis's situation under this theory is one of the most haunting in the show. She is, if this theory is correct, from a world that no longer exists. The civilization that made her, whatever it was and however it worked, is gone. The diamonds rose and remade everything, and the history of what came before is either buried or classified or simply lost. Every gem she would have known from her original context is dead, corrupted, shattered, or so thoroughly transformed by time that no continuity is recognizable. She has been in a mirror for a very long time. When she gets out, she finds a world that does not recognize her type, cannot understand her power level, and cannot account for her history, because her history predates the accounting system. The line she shouts at the crystal gems when she first escapes, "Did you even wonder who I used to be?" lands completely differently if this theory is correct. She is not asking whether they thought about her specific personality and history, the personal question of whether she had been a forgotten prisoner to them. She is asking something deeper. Did any of you wonder what kind of world I came from? Did any of you wonder that there was a before? Did you know there was a before? The answer, under this theory, is that they could not have known. Pearl does not have that history because it was not in any record available to her. The Diamond Authority that replaced whatever came before did not preserve what it replaced. Lapis is a living artifact of something that was overwritten, and the tragedy of that is not just that she was imprisoned. It is that the world she was imprisoned from does not exist anymore in any form that she can return to. The mirror sat in Pearl's gem for thousands of years. It contains a being from before the history anyone alive knows. And when Steven freed her, she stepped out into a world utterly unlike the one she left, and she has spent the rest of the show figuring out what to do with that. Part 5. The diamonds knew the corrupting light did not kill the gems, and Yellow Diamond chose not to look. This theory requires care because it involves attributing a specific kind of knowing to a character whose inner life the show deliberately keeps partially opaque, and that kind of attribution can tip into unfair reading if you push it too hard. So let's be precise about what the theory claims and what the evidence actually supports. The facts? First, the corrupting light was released at the end of the Gem War by Yellow Diamond, Blue Diamond, and White Diamond in a shared moment of grief following what they believed was Pink Diamond's permanent shattering. The show frames this as emotional rather than tactical. They were not deploying a precision weapon. They were expressing a grief so enormous that it had physical consequences. Three beings of staggering power pointing their combined anguish at the world and releasing it. The effect was not death. Every gem on Earth's surface at the time of the attack was transformed rather than destroyed. Their physical forms became monstrous and enormous, and driven entirely by instinct. Their sentience was not eliminated but distorted past the point of recognition. They became what the show calls corrupted gems, creatures of instinct with no accessible memory of who they had been, no capacity for language or relationship, no ability to recognize the people they had known or the purposes they had served. The show, in the main series, depicts the diamonds as believing they had killed the gems on Earth. When Steven eventually tells them what actually happened, that the gems survived in a corrupted form, their reaction is presented as shock. They did not know. The attack, which they intended as an ending, was not an ending at all. The cure, as established in the finale, requires all four diamond powers working together. Steven as pink, combined with yellow, blue, and white, produces the healing light. The corruption is reversed. Every corrupted gem is restored. Now here is the detail the theory focuses on. Yellow Diamond is a military administrator. Her domain is conquest and order and the efficient management of the gem empire. She monitors colonization progress, she deploys forces, she evaluates outcomes. She is, throughout the show, the most functionally competent and organizationally capable of the diamonds. She is the diamond who does the work. The theory asks, is it plausible that Yellow Diamond, having released a planet-scale energy attack, would never in 5,000 years do a single assessment of that attack's effects? Not from guilt, not from remorse, from pure operational thoroughness. Yellow Diamond does not make moves without understanding their consequences, because unverified consequences create unknown variables, and unknown variables create strategic risk. The logic that governs Yellow Diamond's behavior throughout the show would require her to at least once, in 5,000 years, verify the outcome of the attack on Earth. If she verified it even once, she would have discovered that the gems were corrupted rather than dead. She would have discovered that thousands of gems, including crystal gems who had been the enemy but also homeworld gems who had not evacuated in time, were now living as feral creatures on a planet that was technically no longer a battlefield. She would have information, and information about that situation, in Yellow Diamond's operational context, would require a decision about what to do with it. The theory proposes that Yellow Diamond received this information and made a decision that was not to act on it. Not because she was heartless about the individual gems, though the show makes clear she has a complicated relationship with heartlessness, but because acknowledging that the gems were corrupted rather than dead created a problem she did not want to have. Specifically, it would require her to decide what to do about thousands of gems in a permanent state of agony on a planet Homeworld had decided to stop thinking about. The options are not appealing. Sending forces to retrieve the corrupted gems would mean sending forces to Earth, which is the planet whose rebellion they just spent significant resources suppressing, and which just cost them Pink Diamond. Curing the corrupted gems would require cooperation between all 4 diamonds at a moment when Pink was gone, and the feasibility of that cooperation was 0. Shattering the corrupted gems would mean shattering a significant number of gems who had been, technically, loyal Homeworld gems caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of these options is clean. None of them is efficient. The cleanest option, from a pure operational efficiency standpoint, is to classify Earth as a resolved situation and not look at it again, which is, more or less, what happens. Earth is not revisited, in any meaningful way, for 5,000 years. It is forgotten, not accidentally, institutionally. It is placed in a category of things that are done. The theory does not require Yellow Diamond to be monstrous. It requires her to be exactly what the show shows her to be. Someone who has spent millennia developing the capacity to not feel things that it would be operationally inconvenient to feel. The song that most precisely characterizes Yellow Diamond is "What's the Use of Feeling Blue?", in which she tells Blue Diamond that grief is unproductive and should be set aside in favor of effective management of the Paner Empire. And the song, brilliantly, is full of Yellow's own grief, even as it denies the validity of grief. She is not without feelings. She is someone who has perfected the art of overriding them. That is exactly the psychological profile of someone who might receive information about thousands of corrupted gems on Earth and decide that the information and the feelings the information would produce are not something the current operational context has room for. The darker extension of this theory connects to the cluster. Homeworld scientists, at some point after the war, gathered the gem shards that accumulated from corrupted gems that had been broken apart, and they forcibly fused millions of these shards together into an entity buried in the Earth's core, the cluster, a superweapon designed to eventually emerge and destroy the planet. The shards are described in the show as still minimally conscious, still aware, in some minimal, distressed sense. The cluster communicates to Steven as something in pain, millions of voices pulling in different directions, each aware enough to suffer. Homeworld built a weapon out of suffering it knew was suffering. The shard consciousness was not a mystery. It was the design premise of the weapon. You put in enough shards that their conflicting minimal consciousness creates instability, and when the instability reaches a critical point, the whole thing explodes. This is what was done with the people who couldn't be ignored anymore. Not healed, not recovered, used. The theory's implication is that the corrupted gems who generated those shards were known to Homeworld to be in a conscious state. If Homeworld knew enough about shard consciousness to weaponize it, Homeworld knew enough to understand that the corruption had not killed the gems but had left them in a state of ongoing suffering. And Homeworld's response to that knowledge was not recovery. It was resource extraction. Whether Yellow Diamond knew this and made the specific decision to allow it, or whether it happened through the bureaucratic logic of a system that categorizes things and implements efficient solutions without individual diamonds needing to authorize every step, the outcome is the same. 5,000 years of suffering. 5,000 years of beings who had names and purposes and relationships, trapped in feral forms or fused into a weapon in the planet's core. And the mechanism that could have reversed all of it, 4 diamond powers in harmony, sat unused because the diamonds were either unaware of the problem, unwilling to look at it, or structurally unable to cooperate on it. The show's ending heals it, all of it at once, in a moment of genuine grace. But the theory leaves a question the healing cannot fully dissolve. How much of the 5,000 years could have been different if someone with the power to look had chosen to look? Part 6. Pink Diamond did not forget Spinel. She made a choice, and the garden's flowers are the evidence. Rebecca Sugar said something in an interview about Spinel that most fans noted at the time, but that the full weight of takes time to settle. Asked why Pink Diamond abandoned Spinel in the garden, Sugar said, Spinel had become overwhelming for Pink. Pink was ready to move on. Pink wanted to feel like she was progressing. She grew out of Spinel. Quote, "It doesn't excuse what she did. It absolutely doesn't, because it was very cruel. But she can be very cruel." That is the creator of the show saying on record that Pink Diamond abandoned Spinel knowingly, with full awareness that she was leaving her behind and that this constitutes cruelty. The forgetting narrative, the one that frames it as simple distraction rather than a choice, was already complicated by this interview. The theory takes it further. Here is the background for anyone who needs it. Spinel was created specifically to be Pink Diamond's companion before Pink received the Earth colony. Her gem type is built around playfulness and devotion, her form designed for physical comedy and entertainment, her personality calibrated for unconditional warmth. She and Pink played in a garden together for what the show implies was a significant amount of time, and they were happy together in the simple, game-filled way that Pink Diamond's emotional life in those years allowed. When Pink received the Earth colony, she left the garden. She told Spinel they were starting a new game. Stand perfectly still in this spot and wait for me to come back. Spinel, who was designed for exactly this kind of literal-minded, devoted compliance, stood perfectly still for 6,000 years. While Pink Diamond became rose quartz and fought a war and faked her own death and lived for thousands more years and had a child and ceased to exist, the fan theory engages with a very specific question. Did Pink plan this? Not plan it in the sense of having a fully worked-out scheme, but in the sense of making a deliberate choice to leave Spinel behind using a framing that would ensure Spinel stayed behind. Because there is a meaningful difference between forgetting someone and framing your departure in a way that removes any reason for them to follow you. Pink told Pearl to stay behind when she left the garden. Pearl came with her to Earth. Spinel was told to stay and wait. The distinction is not casual. Pink took the gem who was useful to her new life and left behind the gem who represented the life she was moving away from. She did not bring Spinel and then lose track of her. She constructed a reason for Spinel not to follow and then walked away. The game framing is the most significant element here. Pink did not say goodbye. She did not say she was leaving and might not return for a while. She framed the departure as part of a game they were already playing together. She cast the abandonment as something they were doing together, a shared activity, a thing that was happening in the context of their continuing relationship rather than the end of it. This served a very specific function. It removed Spinel's reason to question the departure, to follow, to seek contact, to wonder if something had gone wrong. If it's a game, you wait for the game to end. You trust that the person who started the game will come back to finish it. The construction of the abandonment as a game was either an impulsive deflection, a way of not having to look at what she was doing as she was doing it, or something more deliberate, a choice to ensure that Spinel stayed without having to explicitly refuse Spinel's company or explain why she did not want to bring her. Pink could not have said, "I am leaving and I am not taking you because you remind me of a version of myself I am trying to leave behind." That would have required acknowledging what she was doing. The game framing made the acknowledgement unnecessary. Spinel consented to waiting because she thought she was playing a game. She was not. She was being left. Now go to the garden itself. specifically to the plants. The show places specific flowers in the background of the garden during Spinell's flashbacks. Two types are identifiable: forget-me-nots, which are small blue flowers named with an irony that is either cosmological or the most pointed symbolic choice in the show's entire run, after the act of not being forgotten; and red spider lilies, which in the Japanese floral tradition carry meanings of never to meet again, final farewell, abandonment, and the loss of a loved one. These are not common garden flowers arbitrarily placed for visual interest. They are specific varieties with specific symbolic associations, appearing in the specific garden where someone is about to be left behind forever. The kind of flowers you put in a garden if you want the garden's visual language to communicate something, the dialogue is not allowed to say directly. If Pink planted these flowers, the time she would have planted them is in the period before she left. When the garden was maintained and alive and they were still playing together, if she planted forget-me-nots in the place she was about to leave someone, she planted flowers named Don't Forget Me in the spot where she was about to ensure that someone would be forgotten. That is a specific and layered thing to do. It suggests awareness of what she was doing at some level she could not or would not speak directly. It suggests she knew, at some part of herself, that this was a permanent goodbye, that the game was not a game, that Spinell would wait because Spinell was made to wait, and that the forget-me-nots were some private acknowledgement of that. Or she planted them earlier, without this in mind, and they remain in the garden as a kind of cosmic irony, the flowers named for remembrance, standing in the place of forgetting. Neither interpretation is comfortable. The red spider lilies point in the same direction. They are associated in Japanese tradition with encounters that will not be repeated, with partings that both sides understand are permanent even if they cannot say so. They are cemetery flowers. They appear at the entrance to Buddhist temples and along the borders of rice paddies as a way of marking transitions between the living world and what lies beyond it. In the garden where Spinell will wait forever for someone who is never coming back, they are the show's visual language saying something the characters in the scene do not say. Sugar confirmed that Pink grew out of Spinell in the sense of leaving behind a phase of herself. The flowers confirm, in the show's visual register, that Pink's departure carried the weight of an ending even at the moment it was happening. The theory proposes that Pink knew this, that the cruelty Sugar names was not just the carelessness of someone who moved on without thinking. It was the considered decision of someone who knew she was leaving and chose a framing that made the leaving more bearable, for herself, than a direct goodbye would have been. And Rose, living on Earth for thousands of years afterward, had the ability to return. The galaxy warp, which connected Earth to Homeworld and the rest of the Gem universe, was damaged during the war. But Rose had healing tears. Healing tears restore broken gems to their original form. The show implies they can also restore damaged gem technology. If Rose had ever, in the thousands of years she lived on Earth after the war, chosen to repair the galaxy warp and travel back to the garden, she could have. She did not. Whether this was because she genuinely did not remember, which becomes harder to accept the more you sit with it, or because she could not face what she would find, or because facing it would have required her to acknowledge something about herself she had decided not to acknowledge, the show does not say. But the forget-me-nots were there, and Spinell waited. And 6,000 years passed before Steven's transmission finally found her, standing in exactly the spot Pink left her, in a garden that had grown wild around her and then died, surrounded by flowers whose names say everything the people in the story never managed to. Part 7. Gem civilization was built on the ruins of something the diamonds replaced. The surface of Homeworld, the actual original surface of the planet before the current civilization built its layers over it, is dead. This is established as fact in the show. The kindergarten process of gem creation depletes planets of their essential resources, and Homeworld was the original kindergarten, the first planet to be used in the process that eventually spread across thousands of worlds. The surface has been drained. It is barren and abandoned, covered in structures that have been superseded by the upper-level architecture the Diamond Authority constructed as the civilization expanded upward and outward. That much is established. What is less clearly established, and what the theory focuses on, is what those original surface structures look like and what they suggest about what was there before the current system. The original surface structures on Homeworld, visible in background art from the episodes set there, are in a different architectural style from the current Diamond Authority aesthetics. They are worn and ancient and built around shapes that are not the clean geometric angularity of current homeworld construction, and several of them appear to commemorate or be built in the shape of fused gems. There are structures on the original homeworld surface that look like gem fusions. This is significant because fusion, under the Diamond Authority, is either tightly controlled or forbidden. Fusion between identical gems is permitted for combat and certain specialized missions. Fusion between different types of gems is treated as deeply aberrant, a violation of the social order serious enough that Garnet's existence as a cross-gem fusion was the kind of thing that warranted execution. The Diamond Authority built a civilization on the premise that each gem type is what it is, and those categories should not be combined. But the pre-Diamond surface of Homeworld has fusion architecture. Someone before the Diamond Authority built a culture in which fusions were significant enough to commemorate in monumental construction, which means gem civilization did not always operate the way it operates under the diamonds. There was a period, however long ago, when gems related to fusion differently, when the boundaries between gem types were not the absolute categories the current system treats them as. The theory proposes that the Diamond Authority is not the origin of gem civilization, but a replacement of it. That at some point in gem history, the diamonds arose, or were created, or were selected for power by whatever mechanism operated before them, and they remade gem civilization in their image. The caste system, the prohibition on cross-gem fusion, the kindergarten process for creating new gems, the entire structure of how gems are made and what they are permitted to be. These are not eternal laws of gem existence. They are the laws of the current era, imposed by the current ruling authority on a civilization that had different laws before. This matters because it reframes the rebellion. Rose Quartz's crystal gems were fighting against the Diamond Authority and the way the Diamond Authority ran things. They were fighting to protect Earth and to affirm the value of organic life, and to protect fusions like garnet from being destroyed for existing. But under this theory, they were also, without necessarily knowing it, fighting for something older than themselves. The values the crystal gems stood for, the idea that fusion is an expression of love rather than a tactical tool, the idea that gems can choose their own paths rather than being defined by the type they were made as, the idea that organic life has inherent value rather than being merely an obstacle to gem production. These values are not just rebellious ideas that Rose invented. They are echoes of a way of being that predates the Diamond Authority. The rebellion was not just radical. It was, in some sense, conservative. It was reaching back towards something that existed before the revolution the diamonds created. The show gives one more data point that supports this reading. The cluster, the superweapon buried in the Earth's core, is built from gem shards of corrupted gems. But the cluster is also, in the episode When It Rains, described by Peridot in a way that reveals something about Homeworld's research into shard consciousness. Homeworld has been studying what shards are capable of. They understand that shards retain minimal consciousness. They weaponize that understanding. This suggests a research infrastructure, a scientific or technical capacity for understanding gem consciousness at the shard level that implies Homeworld was studying these things deliberately. What were they studying? If the diamonds are the beginning of gem civilization, what prompted the research into shard consciousness? Why would you study something that should not, under the diamond origin story, be particularly mysterious? Unless there was already a tradition of understanding gems in a way that included an understanding of consciousness and its relationship to the gem, and the diamond system inherited that tradition while discarding the values that gave it meaning. The theory ends in the same place all theories about origins end, with a question that does not have an answer because the evidence is buried or lost or was never recorded in any form that survived. What was gem civilization before the diamonds? What did fusion mean in that world? What happened to end it? Where did the diamonds come from? And were they created by what came before? Or did they destroy what came before? Or both? The show leaves this as an empty space in its cosmology. The theory fills that space with something that makes the rest of the show's moral architecture feel not just politically constructed, but historically grounded. The crystal gems were not just right in a general sense. They were recovering something specific, something that had existed before and that the current order had declared was not allowed to exist anymore. Part 8. The insane garnet theory that was completely correct before anyone confirmed it. Let's spend some time here, not on a theory that might be true, but on one that was demonstrably, verifiably true before the show confirmed it. Because the Garnet case is the clearest possible evidence for why the theories in this video deserve serious engagement. At the end of the first season's finale, Jailbreak, the show confirms what a significant portion of the fandom had already determined. Garnet is not a single gem. She is a permanent fusion. Two gems named Ruby and Sapphire who fused out of love for each other and chose, as the show would eventually fully establish, to remain fused as an expression of their relationship. This revelation is presented as the climax of a dramatic two-part season finale. Audiences who had not anticipated it were genuinely shocked. A substantial portion of the fandom was not shocked. They had built the case for it, with specific evidence, months before the episode aired. The evidence they assembled was this. Garnet has two gems, one on each hand. Every other gem shown in the show, at that point in the series, has exactly one gem. Two gems on one body suggested two gems on one body. The pilot episode, which is available and which was released before the main series began, contains a single frame during Garnet's introduction where the shapes of what appear to be Ruby and Sapphire are briefly visible behind her as silhouettes. The frame is there. It was noticed. The show did not try very hard to hide it. Garnet's eyes, when you look closely, are two different colors with a third in the center. Her right eye is ruby red. Her left eye is sapphire blue. Her center third eye is the purple that results from combining ruby red and sapphire blue. She is, in every frame of the first season, color-coded as the combination of two specific gem types. The color mixing is not incidental or aesthetic. It is the same color mixing that the show later depicts explicitly when Ruby and Sapphire fuse and produce Garnet. The result was built into the character design before the mechanism was explained. There are other details. Garnet's fighting style, when analyzed carefully, is composed of two distinct substyles that later map exactly onto how Ruby and Sapphire fight individually. Her gauntlets, when she uses them, are associated with strength and physical force in a way that connects to Ruby's impulsive, passionate, physically engaged personality. Her occasional future vision, which she demonstrates in several first-season episodes, connects to Sapphire's precognitive abilities. The two components of what she is were visible in what she did before the show ever said that she was made of two things. When asked about this after Jailbreak aired, producer Ian Jones-Quartey confirmed that Garnet had been a fusion since before the pilot, that Ruby and Sapphire were created and designed before the series began, that all the clues were intentional, and that at certain points the crew had wondered whether they were being a little too obvious about it. They were not being too obvious, they were being exactly obvious enough. The audience that looked closely found it. The audience that watched more casually missed it. And the show was designed to work for both groups. A satisfying reveal for those who had not tracked the details, and a satisfying confirmation for those who had. This is the design philosophy that makes all the other theories in this video serious propositions rather than wishful thinking. The show was built by people who placed real information in background art and visual coding and symbolic detail, who expected the audience to find it, who confirmed that expectation after the fact. The Garnet theory was built on the same kind of evidence, the same kind of careful visual attention, the same kind of pattern recognition from consistent detail that all the other theories here rely on. And the Garnet theory was right. What does that tell us about White Diamond's color theory? About Pearl's gem placement? About the flowers in Spinel's garden? About the fusion statues on Homeworld's original surface? It tells us that when the show leaves something in the frame, there is usually a reason it is there. It tells us that the visual language of this show is a secondary storytelling system running parallel to the dialogue and plot, carrying information that the dialogue cannot or will not carry. It tells us that paying attention to what is in the background of shots, what flowers are growing in what garden, what gem is in what position on what character's body, what color the lighting is in a scene and why it is that color. All of this is the work the show is asking its audience to do. The Garnet theory was crazy until it was confirmed. The theories in this video are crazy until they are confirmed. The difference is that some of them may never receive formal confirmation. The show is over. The stories are told. What remains is the accumulated visual detail and the logic and the space for the audience to do the work the show is always asking them to do. Part 9. Steven is not Pink Diamond's heir. He is something the universe has never built before and does not know what to do with. Steven Universe Future is the most psychologically precise thing the franchise produced. It is a show about PTSD and the specific challenges of moving from surviving to living. It is about what happens when you have been a crisis manager for years and suddenly the crisis is over and you have no template for what happens next. It is about the moment when the adrenaline runs out and everything that got suppressed in the service of staying functional starts coming up. It is also, underneath all of that, about what Steven actually is. And the answer the show provides, delivered not through exposition but through the thing that happens to Steven's body when he cannot hold it together anymore, is genuinely one of the strangest and most thought-provoking things the franchise ever committed to. By the time Future begins, Steven is 16. He has spent essentially his entire conscious life managing crises of civilization-threatening scale. He has been captured, put on trial, faced execution, gone to Homeworld, been subjected to White Diamond's possession attempt, led a confrontation with the most powerful being in the known universe, and personally facilitated the healing of thousands of gems who had been corrupted for 5,000 years. He has also lost Rose Quartz before he ever got to know her, spent years processing the reality that his mother was Pink Diamond, and carried the weight of essentially every mistake Pink Diamond made into his own emotional life, as if they were his mistakes to carry. What Future depicts is that all of this has accumulated. The grief has not been processed. The anger, which is legitimate and valid and appropriate to the situation, has not been allowed to surface. Steven has been in helping mode for so long, has been so oriented toward what other people need from him, that he has no established practice of attending to what he needs. And then, under extreme emotional stress, his body starts doing something new. The power manifestation that Future centers on is pink. Vivid, bright, hot pink. His gem flares, his skin takes on an intense pink flush. His body grows. His touch disrupts other gems' physical forms, destabilizing their projections in a way that no gem weapon we have seen does. He generates heat and energy that he cannot direct and cannot stop. The episodes that follow this manifestation are some of the most genuinely disturbing in the franchise. Not because of external threat, but because the threat is internal. Steven is becoming something he does not understand and cannot control. The show's explicit framework for this is trauma, unprocessed grief, and suppressed anger expressing themselves through his powers in destructive ways. And that framework is correct. It is the right reading. The therapy arc that follows, the treatment of Steven's mental health, the permission the show gives him to feel things all the way through rather than suppressing them in service of being helpful, all of this is correct and important, and the right resolution for the character. But the theory asks, what is the power itself? What is the specific mechanism that comes through when Steven's emotional suppression fails? The answer appears to be Pink Diamond's power, not Steven's power destabilized by emotional distress in some general sense. Specifically, it looks like the power level and type associated with the diamonds. The size Steven grows to when fully in the transformed state is similar to the scale at which the diamonds operate. The disruption effect on other gems' forms resembles the disruption caused by diamond-level power, the kind of thing the corrupting light produced but focused and localized rather than spread over a planet. The heat and energy he generates, uncontrolled, is in the same bracket as what the diamonds produce when they act in concert or individually at full output. And here is the insane implication. The difference between Steven and a diamond, in terms of raw power ceiling, might be smaller than anyone in the show has acknowledged. What separates the diamonds from other gems is not just power level. It is also that gems are designed to manage their emotions. The gem system produces beings with emotional states calibrated to their function. A soldier-type gem has the emotional regulation appropriate to a soldier. A pearl is designed for service and devotion. Even diamonds, who have strong emotional lives as the show depicts, are structured in ways that prevent their emotional states from expressing themselves as civilization-threatening events under ordinary circumstances. The corrupting light happened because the three diamonds experienced grief so extreme that their structural emotional regulation failed. That is described as an exceptional event, a breakdown of the normal safeguards. Steven has Pink Diamond's gem and Pink Diamond's power running on human emotional architecture. Human emotional architecture is not designed for gem power levels. It does not have the same regulatory structures. A human being feels things with the full neurological and biochemical intensity of human emotion, which is calibrated for a creature without magical power and without the potential to corrupt a planet from a bad day. When Steven grieves hard enough, he does not have a gem's built-in regulation systems. He has a human being's processing capacity, which is much less efficient under extreme load. And the power that comes through when that processing capacity is overwhelmed is Pink Diamond's power, which is diamond-level power, which is the order of magnitude of power that can do things to civilizations. This is why Future's emotional resolution is also, functionally, the prevention of a catastrophe. Steven getting therapy and processing his grief and allowing himself to feel his anger and being loved by the people around him is not just good for Steven personally. It is, if this theory is correct, the difference between a traumatized person healing and something on the scale of what the corrupting light did to Earth's gems. The stakes of Steven's mental health are much higher than they appear on the surface because Steven's emotional state has civilizational scale consequences if it goes far enough off the rails. The theory also raises the longer-term question that Future does not answer. What is Steven becoming? He is 16 at the end of Future. He is a half-human, half-gem hybrid who will age and change in ways no gem does. As he gets older, as his human emotional life continues developing in complexity and depth, and as his gem powers continue evolving alongside it, what does that trajectory lead to? Will the gem extend his human lifespan the way it extended Lars's? Will his power level continue expanding? Is there a ceiling to what he can do? Or is there something about the combination of human emotional depth and gem power capacity that has no established ceiling? Because nothing like him has ever existed before to test it? The show ends with Steven in a van. Still becoming, still open. The answer to what he is not finished, because he is not finished. He is the first of whatever he is. There is no template. He is writing it as he goes. And the theory suggests that whatever he is writing, the universe is paying attention, even if the characters in it are not quite ready to look at how significant the implications might be. Part 10. Every gem monster was someone with a name, and the show only let us see one of them. This final section is not a theory with a grand cosmological implication. It is, in some ways, quieter than everything else we have covered, but it might be the one that sits with you longest. Every corrupted gem Steven encounters in the main series of the show is, on the surface, a monster. They are large, feral, unable to maintain humanoid form, driven by instinct rather than cognition. They cannot speak. They cannot recognize the people around them. They are not, in any conventional sense of the word, accessible. The show uses them as antagonists in the early episodes, things for the crystal gems to defeat and bubble and secure. But the show also establishes, with complete consistency, that the gem inside each corrupted gem is the same gem that was inside the original being before the corrupting light hit. The consciousness, whatever remains of it, is still there. The gem is not a different gem. It is the same one. The being who existed before is in there, somewhere, in a form that cannot reach itself properly. The most direct evidence for this is Centipedal. In Monster Reunion, Steven attempts to partially restore her consciousness using his healing powers. The healing is not complete. He cannot fully restore her because his power alone is not sufficient. But what he achieves is a partial window, a moment where she is partly herself again, unable to speak but capable of communication. And she communicates by drawing. She draws a ship. She draws her crew, indicated by the crystal gem symbols they wore. She draws the corrupting light coming down. She draws the crystal gem symbol on herself, indicating she was one of them. She draws a specific arrangement of symbols suggesting her rank and role. She was a captain. She drew Rose, and she drew Rose with her arms open. What does a being draw in the fragmented partial consciousness she can access when she draws Rose with open arms? She draws the person she reached for when everything went wrong, the person whose authority and presence meant protection, the person she was serving when the sky came down and turned her into something she was not. She had a name. We never learn it. The show does not give it to us. She had a ship, she had a crew, she had the kind of rank that comes with years of service and demonstrated capability. She was someone's captain. She was, in the world of the Gem War, a person of some significance in the Crystal Gems hierarchy. And she spent 5,000 years as a centipede creature on Earth. And in the brief partial restoration Steven managed, the thing she communicated was, This is what happened to me. And I remember Rose. And Rose's arms were open. The theory is this. Every single corrupted gem Stephen encountered and bubbled and put in the basement of the Crystal Temple was someone like Centipedal. Every one of them had a name. Every one of them had a function, a history, a specific network of relationships and purposes and memories. The corrupted Biggs Jasper had a name. The corrupted Nephrite units had names. The gem monsters in the desert and the ocean and the ruins of ancient gem structures across the earth had names. They had captains and crewmates and things they were trying to do before the light came down. Rose knew some of them. Rose had recruited gems into the crystal gems. She had fought alongside them. She had known their names and their functions and their contributions to the rebellion she was leading. And then the war ended the way it ended. And the beings she had known became the creatures that she spent the next 5,000 years catching and bubbling and securing and storing in the basement of the temple where she lived. Did she speak to them before bubbling them? Did she try? Did she say anything to the creature in front of her that might have reached whatever was left of the person inside it? Or did she find, quickly, that the thing in front of her could not understand her, and then proceed with the practical task of containing it? Did she give them names? The ones she found and bubbled and kept? Or did naming them make it too heavy to do the work that needed to be done, and so she did the work without naming them, and stored the weight of the unnamed alongside the bubbled gem in the basement, and the weight accumulated over 5,000 years until Stephen arrived and started trying to figure out what all of these gems in the basement actually were? The healing at the end of the series restores all of them. All at once? The show frames this as the right ending, and it is. The healing is the proper resolution for this thread. But the theory holds on to the part the healing cannot address. 5,000 years. 5,000 years of being what they were. 5,000 years of being caught and stored by someone who remembered who they had been, or who tried not to remember because remembering was too much to carry alongside everything else she was carrying. They wake up, they are themselves again. Whatever the healing gives back, it gives back fully. But the time does not unhappen. The years are not returned. The experiences of 5,000 years in that form are part of their history now, and the healing does not erase that history. It restores the person who can now have the relationship to their own history that a person can have. That is different from undoing the history. The Crystal Temple basement, in the theory's reading, is not a storage facility. It is a memorial. Rose kept every corrupted gem she found. She could not heal them. She could not help them, but she did not abandon them. She kept them with her, in the place where she lived, which suggests something about what she felt she owed them even when she could not pay it in any practical sense. They were her people. She had led them into a war that ended badly. She stored them beneath the place where she lived and continued to live with them, even in that form, rather than leaving them to fend for themselves in the world as the creatures they had become. The basement is not just Rose's inability to deal with the problem. It is also her refusal to pretend the problem does not exist. The corrupted gems are there. They are still her responsibility. She cannot fix it, but she can keep the fact of them present, under her feet, in the place she comes home to. She can live with the weight of what they are without looking away from it, even if the looking is all she can do. Stephen inherits this along with everything else. The gems in the basement, the weight of the uncured, the knowledge, eventually, of who they used to be, and then the power, at the very end, to do what Rose could not do, to heal them. He did it, they came back, but they had names the show never told us. And somewhere in the 5,000 years the theory holds, those names are still there, carried by the beings who carried them into the corruption and out the other side. Closing. What all of this is actually about. The 10 theories in this video, taken together, are not really about Steven Universe. They are about the impulse to look closely at something you love and ask what is underneath it. They are about the refusal to accept the surface as the whole thing. They are about the specific kind of attention that a deliberately layered work of fiction trains you to bring to it, and about what happens when that attention is applied with enough care and enough rigor. Rebecca Sugar built a show that trusted its audience to pay a specific kind of attention. She embedded things in background art and flower symbolism and gem placements and color palettes and song lyrics. She built a visual language that carried information the dialogue could not carry. She rewarded the audience that went looking for what was there, and she did this consistently and across seasons and in ways that were confirmed after the fact as intentional rather than coincidental. The Garnet theory was built on the same kind of evidence that all these theories are built on, and the Garnet theory was right. Which means that when a theory here fits the visual language of the show, fits the symbolic register, fits the internal logic, fits the color theory and the gem placement rules and the flower symbolism, the probability that the thing in question is there by accident, rather than being placed there by people who were working far ahead and expecting the audience to find it, is low. Some of these theories are probably wrong in their specific claims. The show might have been building to things and then not gotten there. The writers might have planted ambiguities that they did not have clean answers for themselves. Some of what looks like evidence might be coincidence. But the enterprise of looking, the work of taking a show seriously enough to ask what is really happening in the background of the frame, is not wrong. It is the work the show was asking for, from the beginning. From the pilot episode that contained the silhouettes of Ruby and Sapphire in Garnet's introduction frame, visible to anyone who looked frame by frame and thought about what two shapes behind a single gem might mean. Steven Universe is a show about inheritance, about what the people before us left and what we do with it, about how the past accumulates in the present in ways that are sometimes visible and sometimes not, and about what it means to love someone whose choices made the world you live in. It is about the weight of things that were not said and the cost of things that were not known, and the question of whether you can choose something different from what was chosen before you. All of these theories live in that same space. They are attempts to understand what was left, what was hidden, what was planted in the frame for someone to find someday. They are the work of an audience that loved a show enough to ask what it was really saying underneath what it was saying. The show is still there whenever you want to go back to it. 5 seasons, a film, a limited series, background art that contains lore, the dialogue does not. Gems with flowers in gardens whose names mean things. A girl standing still for 6,000 years in a place where someone planted forget-me-nots before they left. A pearl with a gem on her forehead that matched the wrong diamond. White light that was never just white. Look closely, the theories will keep, they always do. If you made it this far, genuinely, thank you. These are the theories that keep me up at night in the best possible way. Some of them feel very probably right. Some of them are probably reaching. All of them felt worth following to where they went. Drop your own theories in the comments. If you have something I didn't cover, or a take on something I did that goes somewhere I didn't go, I want to read it. This community has been doing this work for years, and I always learn something. Hit the like button if this found you at the right moment. Subscribe if you want more of this kind of thing. Slow, careful, story first, lore focused, running as long as it needs to run. And whenever you go back to the show, look at the background art. Look at what's growing in the gardens. Look at what color the light is and why. Look at where the gems are placed on the characters' bodies. The show is still teaching, even now. It was built to keep teaching. Good night, sleep well. We'll see you in the next one. End of script. Expanded deep dives. Additional theory analysis and extended sections. Expanded analysis. White diamond and the emotional arithmetic of the fission. Let's go back to the white diamond theory and push it further, because there is an entire dimension of it that deserves its own sustained attention before we move on. The emotional arithmetic of what this theory proposes is staggering when you follow it out carefully. White diamond, if the fission theory is correct, did not lose parts of herself through some external accident or some battle or some catastrophe. She removed them herself. She identified aspects of her own nature that she considered incompatible with perfection, and she extracted them. She made the decision to be less, in the sense of having fewer inner dimensions, in order to become what she believed was more, in the sense of being more organized, more efficient, more consistent, more controllable. This is a fantasy that shows up in human psychology as well. The fantasy that if you could just remove the parts of yourself that feel things too much, that get attached and hurt and angry and sad, that want things and miss things and need things, you would be stronger, more capable, less vulnerable. The fantasy of optimization through amputation. What the white diamond theory says, and what the show endorses through everything that happens in the Season 5 finale and in future, is that this fantasy does not work. You do not become stronger when you remove your capacity for feeling. You become dangerous in a very specific way. You become someone with enormous power and no reliable internal feedback mechanism about whether you are causing harm. You become someone who can gesture toward care without feeling it, who can perform warmth without accessing it, who can construct elaborate rationalizations for why everything you have done was correct, because the part of you that would have noticed when it was not correct is no longer available for consultation. White Diamond, by the time the show encounters her, has been running a civilization on this principle for so long that she has no meaningful access to the question of whether what she has built is good. She cannot ask that question because asking it would require the part of herself that cares about whether things are good. That part is yellow and blue and pink, externalized, operating as separate beings she has been trying to control rather than listening to as internal voices she should attend to. The specific cruelty she enacts on Pink Pearl, which is one of the darkest things in the show's history. She takes Pink's original companion and damages her psychologically so severely that Pink Pearl carries visible physical evidence of the damage for the rest of her existence. And White does this not in a moment of rage, but as a measured response to Pink's behavior, as a correction, as a lesson, which is exactly what you would expect from someone who has removed their capacity for empathy and replaced it with a theory of what correct behavior looks like and a power sufficient to enforce that theory on others. The theory's reading of this moment is that White is punishing Pink for being the externalized version of everything White discarded. Pink loves things. Pink forms attachments. Pink finds joy in organic life and in the company of the beings around her, and in the freedom to be exactly who she is rather than who her diamond status requires her to be. Every time Pink expresses these qualities, she is embodying everything White chose to remove from herself. And White experiences this as threatening in a way she cannot fully account for, because she no longer has access to the reasoning that would let her understand why she is threatened. The damaged pearl, sent to Pink as a replacement, is White's statement, "This is what your kind of pearl should have been. Blank. Compliant. Without the inconvenient inner life that made your original pearl willing to match your incorrigible behavior, the more sensible pearl, our pearl, is another piece of White's broader project of correcting Pink's tendency toward attachment and feeling. Except the correction does not work. Our pearl meets Pink, Rose Quartz's rebellion rather than correcting it. Our pearl falls in love with Rose rather than managing her. Our pearl becomes the most devoted member of the Crystal Gems rather than the most compliant member of Pink Diamond's court. The piece White sent to correct the problem becomes, instead, the most committed expression of everything White was trying to prevent. There is something in this that feels deeply right about how the world actually works. The attempt to stamp out equality in someone often does not stamp it out. It transmits it. White tried to extract love from herself and ended up creating Pink Diamond, who turned out to be the most love-driven diamond in the Authority. White sent a corrective pearl to replace the one who matched Pink's emotionality, and that pearl turned out to be the most devoted crystal gem in the rebellion. The repressed thing keeps finding its way back, in new forms, in unexpected carriers, in the specific outcomes that the suppression was supposed to prevent. This is what the show means when it says, across multiple episodes and multiple storylines, that the things you try to eliminate do not disappear. They transform. They find new vessels. They keep happening until you find a way to relate to them, rather than a way to shut them out. White Diamond's transformation in the finale and in future is not just a redemption arc in the conventional sense of a villain becoming good. It is the specific reversal of the original choice. She fractured herself to become perfect and became broken instead. She allowed the fractured pieces to be put together again, in the finale's healing, even temporarily, and found that together they could do what separately they could only damage. And then she opened herself to be inhabited by the gems she had once controlled, allowing them to find themselves inside her rather than imposing her version of them on the world. That is the undo of the original action. The original action was, I will push the imperfect parts of myself out so I can be whole and correct. The undoing is, I will open myself to allow other beings to find wholeness inside me, not by controlling them, not by optimizing them, just by being the space that holds them while they figure out who they are. The theory says this is not just character development, it is the specific shape of healing that the original wound required. You cannot fix the fission with more control. You fix it by becoming a container rather than a controller, by offering space rather than imposing structure, by being the prism running in reverse, not splitting the light but allowing it to come back together. Expanded analysis: what the Pearl theory means for the rebellion's history. The Pearl-served white diamond theory has implications for the history of the rebellion that are worth tracing carefully. If Pearl was originally White Diamond's Pearl, then the moment she chose to follow Pink Diamond, the moment she decided to help Pink with the plan to fake the shattering, was not just an act of loyalty or love. It was an act of defection from the highest possible authority in the gem civilization. She was not just helping a rebellious court soldier. She was, if the theory is correct, abandoning White Diamond's court. She was the closest thing to a White Diamond Pearl defecting to the resistance. The word the show uses, renegade Pearl, takes on additional weight here. In The Answer, when Garnet, through the story she tells Steven on his birthday, describes the attack on Blue Diamond's court by Rose Quartz and her crystal gems, she specifically names Pearl as a terrifying renegade Pearl. Not just Rose's Pearl, a renegade Pearl. The word renegade implies that Pearl betrayed something or someone specific, that she went rogue from an allegiance she previously held. If Pearl had simply been Pink Diamond's Pearl and then helped Pink's rebellion, she would be a compliant Pearl following her Diamond's orders. That is not what renegade means. Renegade implies she defected. She left something and chose something else. If she was White Diamond's Pearl, and if she chose Pink's rebellion over White Diamond's court, then renegade is exactly the right word. She did not just follow orders. She made a choice. She left the person she was made to serve in favor of a cause she had decided, for reasons her design did not require her to have, mattered more. And that choice, under this theory, is the source of the specific quality of Pearl's devotion to Rose throughout the thousands of years that follow. It is not just that Pearl loved Rose, she chose Rose. She made an active defection from the most powerful authority in the universe in favor of the rebellion Rose was leading. That kind of choice does not leave you neutral. It commits you completely. Everything that follows, including the compelled silence and the grief and the thousands of years of devotion, is downstream of that original choice to defect. Pearl's psychological complexity, which the show explores carefully over 5 seasons, is partly the complexity of someone who made a choice that was entirely her own for the first time in her existence, and then lived with that choice across a timescale that human beings are not wired to imagine easily. She chose Rose. Rose is gone. The choice stands. The devotion continues, because who Pearl is now is built around that choice even when the object of it is no longer present. There is also the question of what White Diamond knew about Pearl's defection. If Pearl was originally White Diamond's Pearl, White Diamond was aware that her Pearl had chosen to go renegade. White Diamond, who controlled everything and everyone she could, who imprisoned and corrected and managed every aspect of the gem civilization, knew that one of her own pearls had defected to the crystal gems. Did this factor into White Diamond's treatment of Pink? Did White know that the pearl she sent to Pink had eventually chosen Pink's rebellion over her own original master? The relationship between White and Pearl, and whatever White made of that relationship, is a thread the show does not follow at all. But under the theory, it gives their eventual confrontation. In the Season 5 finale, when Pearl is present, as White Diamond's possession attempt on Steven plays out, a layer of specific weight. Pearl has been in White's presence before, under very different circumstances. Pearl chose against White before, and here she is again, with the son of the diamond she chose, in a confrontation with the authority she left. What White makes of this, if anything, is not shown, but it is there in the frame, available to someone paying a specific kind of attention. Expanded analysis. The Spinel Garden and what Pink Diamond's cruelty cost everyone? The Spinel story is one of the most painful things in the franchise, and it earns that pain honestly. Let's stay with it a bit longer and look at the dimensions of it that the theory illuminates. The central image of Spinel's story is so specific and so sustained that it functions almost like a myth rather than a plot point. A, being designed for joy and devotion, stands perfectly still in a garden for 6,000 years, waiting for someone who is not coming back. The garden changes around her. Seasons pass, centuries pass, millennia pass. The flowers grow wild and die. The architecture crumbles. The sky outside the garden dome changes through however many star cycles 6,000 years represents. And Spinel stands still. Because she was told to stand still. Because she was designed to trust. Because she is the thing you make when you want someone who will never give up on you, and never stop waiting for you, and never stop believing you are coming back. The cruelty of what Pink Diamond did is specific. It is not the cruelty of indifference. Pink cared about Spinel for a long time. They were genuinely happy together. The happiness was real. And then Pink grew past the phase of herself that Spinel represented, and rather than acknowledging that growth directly, rather than having an honest conversation about the fact that she was leaving and might not return, and that Spinel should feel free to live her own life, Pink constructed a fiction that kept Spinel in place without requiring Pink to look at what she was doing. The fiction of the game is the key to what the theory identifies as the calculated dimension of the abandonment. Games have rules. Games have a winning condition. Games have a player on each side who is engaged in good faith. If you are playing a game and you simply leave and never come back, you have not abandoned the game. You have abandoned the pretense that it was a game. But the person you left in the game cannot know that until they have waited long enough to be sure, and Pink's framing gave Spinel no reliable way to know when long enough was. A straightforward abandonment would have given Spinel agency. I'm leaving. I'm not coming back. You can do whatever you want now. That is honest. It is painful, but it respects Spinel as a being capable of making decisions about her own existence. What Pink did instead was remove Spinel's agency while maintaining the appearance of Spinel's participation. The game requires Spinel to stand still. Spinel agrees to stand still. Spinel believes this is her voluntary choice in the context of a shared activity. It is not. It is Pink's mechanism for ensuring Spinel does not follow and does not seek her out and does not complicate the new life Pink is building on Earth. Spinel's trauma, when it finally surfaces 6,000 years later, is the trauma of that specific violation, not just of being left, of being made complicit in her own abandonment, of having agreed, freely and cheerfully, to the thing that destroyed her, of having believed right up until Steven's broadcast reached her that she was doing something Pink wanted her to do, that she was being a good friend, that the game was still running and her participation in it still meant something. The moment she learns the truth is the moment 6,000 years of compressed reality collapses onto her all at once. Pink is gone. The game was never a game. She stood still for longer than most civilizations exist because someone she trusted decided it was more convenient to let her stand there than to have a conversation. And then Pink lived an entire second life, a complete arc of rebellion and war and love and motherhood and death, and never once went back to the garden. The forget-me-nots matter here in a way the theory's reading makes more uncomfortable than the show's surface-level irony captures. If those flowers were in the garden while Pink was still present, if they were there during the period when Pink and Spinel played together and were happy, then they predate the abandonment. They were there before the game. They were part of the space Pink and Spinel shared. If Pink planted them, she planted flowers named after remembrance in a space she was about to forget. If they were already there when Pink arrived, they witnessed the whole arc, the happiness, the growing distance, the constructed game, the departure, the 6,000 years of stillness, the death of the garden around the waiting figure. Forget-me-nots, in a garden where the instruction was to stay still and wait to be remembered, while the person who gave the instruction went on to have an entire second life without once going back. There is a version of this that is simply tragic. Pink forgot. The flowers' names are irony, not commentary. She moved on and she forgot and she never came back, and that is terrible, but it is the kind of terrible that happens without intent. And there is the version the theory proposes, which is supported by Sugar's own words. Pink did not forget. She grew out of Spinel. She chose not to go back. She chose to let the game run rather than end it honestly. The forget-me-nots, under this reading, are not ironic. They are culpable. They are what you plant in a garden when you know, at some level, that what you are about to do is the kind of thing that deserves to be remembered. They are the only acknowledgement Pink was willing to make of what she was actually doing, placing, in the space she was about to leave someone forever, the specific flower that says, "Remember me," as if she needed Spinel to remember her, as if the one who was being left was the one who might forget. Expanded analysis. The cluster and what it says about Homeworld's relationship to suffering. The cluster deserves sustained attention that the main theory section could only partially give it. In When It Rains, Peridot explains to Stephen and the crystal gems what the cluster is. Millions of gem shards, fragments of gems that were shattered or corrupted and broken down to their component pieces, have been forcibly fused together into a single massive entity buried in the Earth's mantle. When it fully develops and emerges, the entity will be so large and its emergence will be so violent that it will crack the planet apart. Earth will be uninhabitable. The organic life on it will be destroyed. And the cluster itself, having emerged, will presumably continue as a superweapon available for deployment. The show's emotional center in the cluster arc is the communication Stephen achieves with it. He projects his consciousness into the Earth's mantle and finds the cluster there, and what he finds is not a weapon. It is not even coherent enough to be an entity in the conventional sense. It is millions of fragments of consciousness, each one still minimally aware, pulling in different directions, unable to agree on a direction or a purpose or a coherent experience because each shard is a remnant of a different being with a different history, and there are millions of them, and they cannot stop pulling against each other. It is, functionally, a depiction of suffering at a scale the show had not yet depicted. The corruption is thousands of gems in anguish. The cluster is millions of gem fragments in a state of fragmented, directionless, agonized consciousness. The show asks us to sit with this. The deliberate construction of a weapon from suffering that was known to be suffering. The theory that Yellow Diamond knew the corruption had not fully killed the gems on Earth connects here to a specific practical question. Homeworld built the cluster. Homeworld scientists collected the shards and fused them. This required understanding that the shards retained sufficient consciousness to fuse under sufficient force. That understanding implies research into shard consciousness. Testing, probably, of how shards respond to fusion attempts, measuring the degree of consciousness retained, determining the minimum shard count needed for the destabilizing effect. If you are doing that research, you know what the shards are. You know they are aware. You know they are in distress. The research that built the cluster was built on an institutional understanding of shard consciousness that Homeworld's scientists developed, presumably, through exactly the kind of careful empirical work that any large-scale engineering project requires. Homeworld scientists knew the shards were conscious. They built the weapon anyway. This is not a mistake or an oversight or an ignorance that could excuse what happened. It is a choice. The choice was made by a system that categorizes suffering as an acceptable engineering input when the output is strategically valuable enough. The theory asks whether Yellow Diamond personally authorized this, or whether the institutional logic of Homeworld produced this result without requiring specific Diamond oversight. Both are possible. Yellow Diamond manages conquest and resource acquisition. Gem shards from a planet with an ongoing crystal gem problem are, from a resource management perspective, the byproduct of an unsatisfactory colonial operation. Using them for a weapon that will eventually destroy the problem planet entirely is efficient. It resolves multiple outstanding items simultaneously. Whether Yellow Diamond authorized this specifically, or whether the Homeworld administrative apparatus reached this outcome without requiring her personal sign-off, the outcome is the same. Millions of fragments of beings who once had names and purposes and relationships, used as construction material for a bomb, buried in a planet, left there. Stephen communicates with the cluster. He helps it find a kind of internal equilibrium, a way for the millions of conflicting shard consciousnesses to reach something like stability rather than constant agonized opposition. And then he bubbles the entire thing, containing it rather than allowing it to emerge and destroy the planet. The cluster, in the finale, chooses to help the crystal gems. It remains in its bubble in the Earth's mantle. The healing at the end of the show is presented as total. All the corrupted gems healed. But the cluster is not addressed in the same way. The cluster is millions of shards fused together. Reversing that fusion would presumably release millions of individual gem shards, each of which might retain some degree of consciousness, none of which is a complete gem, none of which corresponds to a single recoverable being. What would it mean to heal the cluster? Could you unfuse it? Could you restore each shard to the gem it came from? Could you reassemble the gems from their shards and restore the beings who had been shattered? The show does not ask this question. The cluster's stable equilibrium and its contribution to the final battle are treated as the endpoint of its arc. And probably the show is right not to pursue the question further, because there is no answer to it that would not require the show to spend another entire series exploring it. But the question sits there in the logic of what was done and what was healed and what remains open, and the theory holds it even when the narrative moves past it. In the Earth's core, in its bubble, something that is made of millions of someones who once had names is still there. At peace now, in some sense, stable, but still there. Still the thing Homeworld built from suffering. Expanded analysis. Steven and the inheritance of unprecedented power. Let's stay longer with the question of what Steven actually is, because Future raises this question with more specificity than anything else in the franchise, and then chooses a resolution that is emotionally correct without being fully explanatory. The power that manifests in Steven during Future's more extreme moments is distinctive in a way the show depicts with careful visual precision. It is not just that he glows pink. It is not just that he grows larger. The specific quality of the power, the way it disrupts other gems' physical forms, the heat it generates, the instability it produces in the area around him, these are gem phenomena that the show has previously associated with diamond-level operations. When the diamonds launch the corrupting light, the show depicts it as an emission from their gem-powered forms aimed at the Earth. When Steven enters his transformed state in Future, the resemblance is not just visual. The class of effect he is capable of producing, the scale of disruption, the quality of the light is in the same register. A transformed Steven touching a gem disrupts that gem's physical projection in a way that nothing short of diamond power or specialized gem destabilizing technology was previously shown to do. The theory's extended analysis of this considers what the power level ceiling actually is for someone who has Pink Diamond's gem, running on full human emotional depth, without the regulatory structures that gem psychology builds into gem-type beings. Gem emotional regulation is not just a cultural thing, it is structural. The show depicts gems as beings whose emotional states are kept stable partly by the nature of their gem-centered consciousness. They can be destabilized by extreme trauma, as the corruption demonstrates, but under ordinary circumstances, even extreme emotions in gems tend to stop short of catastrophic physical effect. Pearl has grieved Rose for thousands of years. Garnet carries the weight of the gem war and the responsibility for everyone depending on her. Amethyst has lived with shame and insecurity for hundreds of years. None of them, under ordinary circumstances, begins disrupting the fabric of reality around them because they are sad. Steven, during Future's most extreme sequences, does. His emotional state, when it exceeds his capacity to regulate it, translates directly and immediately into the kind of physical effect on the world that the diamonds themselves produce only when operating at significant output. This suggests that his power ceiling, whatever it is not calibrated to ordinary human emotional intensity. It is calibrated to diamond intensity, with human emotional throughput running through it. A diamond in distress produces catastrophic effects. The corrupting light happened because 3 diamonds were in distress. A human being in distress, ordinarily, produces no physical effects on the world beyond the typical human behavioral consequences of distress. Steven is a human being in distress with diamond power capacity, and the result is something the world has not had a category for. The extended theory considers what Steven's long-term trajectory looks like. He is 16 at the end of Future. He will age, probably. The question of how much, and at what rate, and whether the gem in his stomach will eventually begin extending his lifespan the way Pink's gem in Lars's body extended Lars's lifespan, is completely open. If Steven ages at a full human rate and dies a normal human death in his 70s or 80s, that is one kind of story. If the gem, over time, begins affecting his aging the way it appears to affect Lars, that is a completely different kind of story. One where Steven might live long enough to watch everyone he loves die and to outlast the human civilization that shaped him, and to eventually become something that has more gem than human in it simply by attrition. The show does not tell us. It ends with him in a van, still becoming. But the theory suggests that the van trip is not just a coming-of-age journey toward personal clarity. It is the beginning of a story about a being whose nature is genuinely open, whose trajectory is not defined by any existing category, whose relationship to time and power and change is something neither gem, nor human, nor diamond had previously established a template for. He is the first of what he is. Whatever that is has not been defined yet. The universe will have to work out what to do with it as he goes. And the theory holds that possibility as more interesting than the alternative, treating Stephen's resolution in future as the end of the question rather than the beginning of a much longer answer. Expanded analysis. The named and the unnamed, and what 5,000 years without a name means. The gem monster theory, the one about every corrupted gem having been someone with a name, has a dimension that the main section could only touch on and that deserves its own space. The show's treatment of Centipedal's partial restoration in Monster Reunion is one of the most carefully written sequences in the series. What makes it remarkable is the specific kind of information Centipedal conveys in the brief window of restored consciousness Stephen achieves. She does not just express generic distress. She conveys specific information. She was a captain of a specific ship. She had a specific crew. She fought in the Gem War on the Crystal Gem's side, and she knows what happened to her. She can connect the before and the after. She knows she was someone before the light came down. The most significant image she draws, the one the show lingers on, is Rose with her arms open. This image is not just a depiction of Rose. It is a memory of a specific quality of relationship. Rose's arms being open means Rose was someone you could approach, someone you could reach toward, someone who represented a kind of safety and welcome that mattered to the beings who served under her. The captain of a ship, in a moment of partial restored consciousness after 5,000 years of corruption, reaches back through all of that to the memory of her leader with her arms open. What does that tell us about what the Crystal Gems were, at their best, under Rose's leadership? They were a force built around the idea that you mattered, that your existence had value beyond your function, that the leader was someone you could approach with her arms open, not someone you maintained perfect formal distance from. For beings who had come from Homeworld, where every gem's purpose was defined at formation and deviation was punishable by destruction, that quality of welcome would have been extraordinary, worth fighting for, worth fighting under. And then the light came down, and the captain of the ship who trusted Rose, who knew the crystal gem symbol and wore it and believed in what it represented, became a centipede creature. And Rose spent 5,000 years catching corrupted crystal gems and putting them in the basement and could not heal them. And the captain of the ship was in the basement when Stephen was born. Was in the basement when Stephen was growing up? Was in the basement when Pearl was teaching Stephen to sword fight in the barn, and Garnet was training him, and Amethyst was being chaotic, and all of it was happening right above her. Did Rose ever go into the basement? Did she ever sit with them? Did she ever speak to the creature who had been the captain of a ship and say something, even knowing it could not understand her? The show does not tell us. But the question sits in the basement alongside all of the bubbled gems. There is something about Stephen's instinct, throughout the series, to try to communicate with the corrupted gems rather than simply containing them, that connects to this theory in a meaningful way. Stephen keeps trying to reach the consciousness inside the monster. He does this with Centipedal most famously, but he does it consistently with other corrupted gems as well. He looks for the person inside the creature. He assumes the person is there, and the show confirms he is right. The person is always there. The consciousness persists. The corruption does not eliminate the individual. It just makes the individual inaccessible to themselves and to others. Rose taught the crystal gems that every being has value. Stephen believes this in a way that the crystal gems sometimes have to be reminded of. The difference is that Stephen is the son of someone who said that, but whose actions sometimes contradicted it, and he has processed that contradiction in a way that has made the belief in each being's value more active, more insistent, more practically expressed in his moment-to-moment behavior. He looks for the person inside the monster. He finds them. He helps them find themselves. And at the end, all of them come back. The ones in the basement, the ones in the ocean, the ones in the desert ruins, the ones who had been feral for 5,000 years, the ones who had been the captain of a ship with a crew and a mission and a crystal gem symbol on their chest. All of them. They came back. They had names that the show never told us. And somewhere on Earth, after the healing, beings who were corrupted for 5,000 years are now living whatever their next chapter is. The theory does not know what it looks like. The show does not tell us. But they are there, somewhere off the edge of the frame, doing what comes next. Extended closing. The show that was built to keep giving. There is one last thing worth saying before this video ends, because it connects everything we have covered tonight in a way that feels important to name directly. Steven Universe is, structurally and intentionally, a show that was built to outlast itself. Rebecca Sugar and her team made a show whose full meaning was not contained in any single viewing, or any single season, or even the complete run of the series. The meaning accumulates. It lives in the relationship between what you knew when you watched it, and what you know now, and what you will know the next time you go back. Every theory in this video is evidence of that. The Garnet theory existed in the show from before the pilot and was confirmed in the season 1 finale. The rose as pink diamond theory circulated in the fandom for years before a single pale rose confirmed it. The pearl gem placement theory has been discussed since early in the show's run and remains, to this day, unconfirmed in its most interesting dimensions. The white diamond fission theory is embedded in physics and color theory, and a single line from the season 5 finale, and it will probably remain a theory forever because the show is over, and the confirmation will not come. What the show did, across its run, was establish that this kind of looking was not just permitted, it was invited. The Garnet confirmation told the audience, "We put it in the show from the beginning. We expected you to find it." The team's public comments about the deliberateness of the clues told the audience, "You are not imagining the layers, they are there." Which means every other layer that has been found and that sits unconfirmed is sitting in a context where the creators already told us they work this way. The question is not whether there are layers the show did not explicitly confirm. There demonstrably are. The question is only which specific theories found those layers accurately, and which ones built coherent structures on coincidence. That distinction cannot be made with certainty. The show is over and the clarifying confirmation will not come. What remains is the work of the audience, the careful looking, the pattern recognition, the application of the show's own visual and symbolic logic to the details that have not yet been explained. The forget-me-nots in Pink's garden, the gem placements, the fusion statues on Homeworld's original surface, the color spectrum of the diamonds, the specific way Pearl's fear works, the power that comes through Steven's gem when his emotional regulation fails. All of these are details that are in the show. They were placed by people who worked deliberately and far ahead. The theories about them are the audience doing the work those people were inviting. Some of the theories in this video will eventually be confirmed by supplemental material, by Rebecca Sugar's own retrospective comments, by the show's writers in future interviews. Some of them never will be. Some of them are probably wrong. All of them are the result of taking a show seriously enough to ask what it was really saying underneath what it was saying. That is what Steven Universe was built for, to be taken seriously, to be watched carefully, to be returned to. To keep giving, keep teaching, keep opening new rooms in its architecture every time someone looks at it with fresh attention or prior knowledge they did not have the last time. The mysteries will keep. The show is still there, and whenever you go back to it, it will be waiting, full of things you have already found and things you have not yet found and things that are probably there if you look at the right part of the frame at the right moment. Beach City is always on the coast somewhere. The Crystal Temple is lit against the sky. The ocean is constant and reliable. And somewhere in the architecture of the show, in the color of a character's skin and the placement of a gem and the flowers growing in an abandoned garden, there are more things to find. Look closely. There always is. Bonus deep dive. The corruption theory nobody talks about Rose's tears and what they actually are. There is a thread in the show's lore about Rose's healing tears that deserves its own sustained treatment, because when you pull it all the way through, it connects to almost everything else we have been discussing tonight, and reveals something about the nature of Pink Diamond's power that the show implies without ever quite stating directly. Rose Quartz's healing tears are established early in the series as one of her most distinctive and most mysterious abilities. She can cry tears that heal gems. Her tears are what Steven inherited in the form of his healing leva. But the full scope of what those tears can do is not established until Lars dies in space. In I Am My Monster, Steven holds Lars and cries over him, and the tears bring Lars back. Not quite as he was. Lars comes back pink. His skin becomes a vivid pink. His hair transforms into something that, when you enter it, opens into a portal to Lion's dimension. He ages more slowly than an ordinary human. He no longer needs to eat. He no longer needs to breathe in the same way. He is, in some essential physiological sense, changed. revived, but revived into something that is not quite what he was. The mechanism of his revival is identical, the show confirms, to whatever happened to Lion. Rose cried over Lion at some point, probably when he died, and whatever her tears did to his body produced exactly the same set of transformations: the pink coloring, the portal in the main that connects to a pocket dimension, the slowed aging, the maintenance that does not require food in the ordinary sense. What is this mechanism exactly? The show never describes it in technical terms, but there are enough details to begin constructing a picture of what it does. Rose's tears do not simply restore something to its prior state, they change it. They make it into something new, that is adjacent to what it was but is not identical to it. Lion was a lion. After the tears, he is a pink lion with a pocket dimension in his mane and the ability to create diamond-shaped portals in space. He is still recognizably a lion in form and in temperament, but he has been fundamentally altered in ways that make him something that did not exist before Rose wept over him. Lars was a human. After Steven's tears, which are the same power in a different carrier, he is still recognizably Lars in form and temperament. But he is a Lars who has been altered in ways that make him something that did not exist before, something that carries the specific signature of diamond healing power in his biology. What does diamond healing power actually heal? Not the prior state of the thing. The diamond healing that cures corruption does not restore the corrupted gems to an exact prior state either. It restores their consciousness, their form, their ability to function as themselves. But the corruption is part of their history now. The time they spent corrupted happened. What the diamond healing gives back is not the time but the self that can now have a relationship to its own history. The theory proposes that Rose's healing tears, when applied to an organic being at the point of death, do something analogous. They do not reverse the death. Lars died. Lion presumably died in whatever way he died. The tears do not undo the death in a simple restoration sense. They do what diamond power does to corruption. They give something back that allows continued existence with an altered nature. They restore the continuity of the individual while changing what kind of individual that continuity operates in. This means Rose's tears, more precisely, are a transformation agent with a healing effect rather than a pure restoration agent. They make the thing they touch into something new that still is, in an essential sense, the thing it was. Lion is still Lion. Lars is still Lars. But they are those selves inhabiting a body that has been remade, that has been, in some technical sense, touched by Pink Diamond's fundamental power and changed by that touch into a form that carries the mark of that power. Now think about Steven. Steven was born from Rose dissolving into him. He carries Rose's gem. He inherited her tears. He is, in the theory's reading, not just the son of Rose Quartz. He is the thing that carries the transformation agent for diamond-level healing in his biological form rather than in a separate gem-carried power. His tears are what they are because Pink Diamond's power is not just in his gem but in him. It has been integrated into his human biology in a way that no prior being can be used as comparison. When Steven heals people, when his tears restore someone, or when his power at the end of the series combines with the other diamonds to heal the corruption, he is doing what Pink Diamond's power does. But he is doing it from inside a human body with human emotional throughput, which means the power is not just available to him as an external tool he applies. It is part of what he is, the same way his ability to feel things is part of what he is. And the two things, the feeling and the healing power, are not separate systems that happen to coexist in one body. They are integrated. His capacity to heal and his capacity to feel are the same system running in different registers. This is why Steven's healing is different from the healing available to other gems. Gems deploy their healing powers through deliberate application of their gem's abilities. Steven's healing comes through emotional expression. His tears, which heal, are the physical expression of grief. His love, which also has healing properties as the series develops, is the expression of emotional connection. The healing is not a power he switches on. It is a consequence of what he feels. Pink Diamond, according to everything the show tells us, was the most emotionally alive of the diamonds. The one who felt things most intensely. The one who cared most deeply. The one whose power was most directly connected to love and healing, rather than to conquest or control. In Steven, this connection between emotion and healing power is not just present as a character trait, It is physiological. He heals when he feels when he heals. The two things are the same thing. The theory's final proposition here is this. Stephen's healing tears, and by extension everything Rose's tears did to Lion and Lars, are evidence that Pink Diamond's power is fundamentally not a conquering power or a controlling power. It is a transforming power. It makes things into more of what they most essentially are, with the signature of diamond capacity running through them. Lion is still Lion. Lars is still Lars. The corrupted gems restored by diamond healing are still themselves. What the power adds is not a diamond overlay. It is a diamond substrate, a foundation of something that makes continued existence possible in a form that is genuinely the self rather than a diminished or distorted version of it. This is what Stephen is, at the deepest level the theory can reach. He is the substrate. He is the power that makes continued existence possible in its truest form, running in a human body, feeling its way through the world, healing through love, rather than healing through application of force. The gem civilization could not produce Stephen. It does not have a category for him. He is the specific and unrepeatable result of Pink Diamond's power combining with human biology and human emotional depth, producing something that neither gem civilization nor human civilization has a template for. He is the most powerful healer the show has depicted, and the power comes from exactly the thing that made Pink Diamond least suitable for diamond life, and most essential to everything that comes after it. The capacity to love things fully, without reservation, in ways that cost you enormously, and that keep making you more than you were, rather than less. A final word on fan theories and the space they inhabit. I want to close tonight not with a summary of what we covered, but with something about what this kind of theory work actually is, and why it matters beyond just being a fun exercise in speculation. Steven Universe is a show about what people leave behind and what the people left behind do with it. That is the explicit subject. Stephen inheriting Rose's gem. The crystal gems inheriting the aftermath of a war they survived but did not fully resolve. Beach City inheriting a proximity to alien civilization that nobody asked for, and that shaped the town in ways the people in it only partially understand. Every character in the show is navigating some form of inherited situation, some set of circumstances that preceded them and that they did not choose, and that they now have to figure out what to do with. The fan theory culture around this show is the same thing, in miniature. The audience inherited a story that was told with specific choices and specific deliberate details and specific intentional silences. They did not make those choices, but they received them. And what they have been doing ever since, with the theories and the analyses and the frame-by-frame inspections and the flower symbolism lookups, is figuring out what to do with what they inherited. This is, in some sense, what the show was asking its audience to practice all along. The work of taking what came before you, the choices that were made by other people, the world that was built before you arrived in it, and deciding what to do with it, not passively receiving it, not ignoring it, not being crushed by the weight of it, but actively engaging with it, working through it, finding what is there, deciding what it means, and doing something with what you found. The theories in this video are the audience doing that work. Some of the work will turn out to be right in ways that future confirmation establishes. Some of it will turn out to be elaborate structures built on coincidence. All of it is the right kind of work for the kind of show this is. All of it is what the show was built to produce in the people who watched it carefully. The show trusted its audience to pay attention. That trust was honored. And it continues to be honored, years after the last episode aired, by people who are still looking at the background art and still tracking the gem placements and still wondering about the flowers in the garden and still asking what White Diamond was before she was what we see. The show is still there, the theories will keep, and the work continues. One last theory. The Beach City theory nobody discusses enough. There is a theory about Beach City itself that rarely gets the serious treatment it deserves, because it sits so much in the foreground of the show that it seems too obvious to be a theory at all. But follow it carefully, and it resolves into something genuinely strange. Beach City is not a random location. The Crystal Temple, the ancient alien structure that the crystal gems built their home against, exists on the coast of Beach City. The show establishes that the crystal gems have been in Beach City for as long as anyone in the current population can remember. The human families who live in Beach City have been there for generations, and in those generations they have grown up adjacent to whatever the crystal gems are and whatever they do. What the theory asks is this a coincidence? Did the crystal gems settle on the coast of what became Beach City randomly, or was there a reason? And if there was a reason, what was it? The show places several significant gem artifacts in the vicinity of Beach City. The kindergarten is within reach. The galaxy warp is accessible. Various gem ruins and structures are distributed across the area in ways that suggest this stretch of coastline was, in the era of Pink Diamond's colonization of Earth, a significant gem operational hub, which means humans who settled this coastline at any point in the thousands of years since the Gem War were settling in the vicinity of a gem operations hub. They were, without knowing it, moving into a space that had been shaped by gem activity in ways that the visible architecture, the ruins, and the temples only partially account for. The ground itself, the specific mineral composition of the coastline in this area, was affected by the kindergarten process in the vicinity. The warp pad infrastructure in the area reflects that this was a well-connected node in the pre-war gem network. The humans of Beach City did not choose this location randomly. Humans settle coastlines for obvious reasons: trade, fishing, water access, shelter from prevailing winds. But among the specific coastlines available on the eastern seaboard of this version of America, they settled this one. And this one happens to be where the Crystal Temple is, and where the Galaxy Warp is, and where the kindergarten is within reach. The theory's simplest version is that the crystal gems, when they chose where to build their base on Earth after the war, chose a location that was already a significant gem site because it had the infrastructure they needed and the history they were already connected to. And humans eventually settled around them because the coastline was good for human settlement. And the presence of the Crystal Temple on the coast was, by the time anyone living in Beach City can remember, simply a fact about the landscape. But the extended theory asks whether the crystal gems, specifically Rose, had any role in drawing humans to this particular coastline. Rose loved humans. She was fascinated by them. She protected them. She built relationships with them over thousands of years. The show implies she was present in and around human civilization throughout the post-war period. Is it possible that the human community at Beach City is not just an accidental neighborhood, but something Rose was, in various ways, involved in cultivating? A community she kept returning to, kept being connected with, that eventually developed into the town that Steven was born into? If so, then Beach City is not just where Steven happened to grow up. It is the specific human community that Rose shaped over thousands of years, without anyone in it fully knowing she was doing it. The characters of Beach City, the Fryman family and Mayor Dewey and the pizza shop and the Big Donut, are the long-term result of Rose Quartz caring about a particular stretch of coastline and the people who lived near it. And Steven, who is Rose's child and who grew up in exactly this community, is shaped by both his gem inheritance and by the specific texture of human community that Rose spent millennia adjacent to. He is not just half gem, half human in a generic sense. He is the specific person who grew up in the specific community that a diamond, who fell in love with humanity, kept returning to. That gives Beach City a weight in the story that the show depicts, but never quite states it is not the backdrop. It is the accumulated result of thousands of years of Rose choosing to stay. Everything about it, the warmth and the weirdness and the specific kind of goodness that the people of Beach City represent in the show, is the world that Rose's presence shaped. And Steven is the person it produced. That is not nothing. That is probably the most important thing the show never directly says.